You want to hear a horrifying true story that is not fiction? So picture this. It's early morning. Sunlight tries to stream into a family's home, but all the windows facing outside have been boarded up. Inside, a woman goes about her daily chores, basically in complete darkness. She happens to catch a small glance of the street through a very tiny gap in the window, just enough to see the armed Taliban patrolling the streets. She quickly turns away, fearing for her safety. Under new Taliban decree, homes are forbidden from having windows facing anywhere where a woman may be seen. This is all under claims that is to protect her. They're protecting a woman's honor, saying that even a woman being seen in her very own courtyard or very own kitchen could lead a man to want to do some obscene acts. And with that, daylight and fresh air have literally become a luxury for Afghan women. This is just one example of the Taliban's ongoing war against women. But to understand the current nightmare, we have to kind of look back a little bit. No, this isn't the first time that the Taliban have ruled over Afghanistan. We know this. It's certainly not the first time that they've tried to erase women from the public. So when the Taliban first took over in 1996, they imposed a draconian regime of gender segregation, right? Often referred to as gender apartheid. Women were forced to disappear from workplaces and schools. Girls above the age of 8 years old were banned from education completely. So many of them had to attend secret underground schools, which was a huge risk. And virtually all jobs were off limits to women, except perhaps like a few female doctors, they had to have those in there. Honestly, this is only because in Taliban morality, it's because a woman cannot be checked out by a male doctor without having a male relative present. So they just felt like they had to have a couple female doctors in the mix, even though they are not held to the same degree as a male doctor would be. So simply leaving the house became dangerous for women. So this was when they started to not be able to step outside of their house without like a male guardian and that full body burqa veil that covers them from head to toe. The Taliban had this thing called the morality police, right? Where they would literally patrol. It's like the fucking Taliban's Gestapo, you know what I mean? They would patrol the streets with whips and guns. If a woman's face was even glimpsed in public, or if her ankles were showing just the slightest amount, she could be whipped in public or gunned down in public, or having a glimpse of her face shown or her fucking ankles. Like, beyond just being whipped in the streets, as if that was enough, you could be full on executed for this, for your ankles showing, bitch. If the world doesn't need a fucking redo, we need to be on top, okay? But anyways, back then the Taliban even went as far as painting over all of the windows of homes, quite literally wiping away women from the view. It was literally a regime of terror. So then in came 2001, right? The US-led invasion kind of toppled the Taliban over. So over the next 2 years after that, the Afghan women kind of were starting to regain their rights and visibility, gradually, slowly. But it was happening. This allowed women and children to, start attending the schools again, go back to their jobs, basically start to live a normal life, like a Western kind of life. So this was like their era of hope, which was between 2001 and 2021, which then brings us to August 2021. As the US troops withdrew, the Taliban, of course, they took power again. So this led to a mass amount of women, especially women, but, families in general trying to escape Kabul. Taliban at first initially was like, yeah, we're gonna respect the women's rights, okay? You guys can still keep your jobs and go to school and blah 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 blah. Nothing's gonna change for you. We see what good they've done here. We're gonna keep everything the same. If not, actually, we're gonna make things better for the women and children, right? But the women knew better, and they were right to know better, because just within days of taking back over their regime, the Taliban ordered women to stay inside again. Of course, yet again, claiming that this is for women's safety. We're just trying to protect you girls. Protect them from what, you say? They say that it's because the Taliban fighters are not yet trained to respect women. And that was just within days. That was just a subtle reminder, subtle foreshadowing, I should say, of what was to come. In the weeks and months that followed, schools were shut down again. Many high school-aged girls at this point had missed years of important schooling. And by the end of 2021, a vast majority of women in the workforce were again fired and sent back home. Not only were they fired and sent back home, but they were actually banned completely for working in those occupations, like specific occupations. And then the Taliban gradually reimposed medieval dress codes, right? In May 2022, the Taliban decreed that fucking women should cover themselves again from head to toe. Don't show us anything or we're gonna fucking ravage you like the animals we are. So these burqas were not like the other ones before. They were like you know how they have the eyepiece open. I think it's just like completely open wide. Well, these ones were not like that. It was like a mesh covering. So like they were literally covered completely. You can't see a single fucking piece of them. And women were also banned from traveling 45 miles without a man next to them. Like you needed a male escort. Not even just an escort. This male had to be somebody related to you. They just kept shutting everything down from here on out, okay? Like they went for the higher education colleges. They took all the women out of there. They banned all women from working in any kind of humanitarian, what is it? No, like a humanitarian organization. They banned all women from participating in anything like that. They even shut down the beauty salons in 2023. By the end of 2024, Afghanistan was essentially a prison made for women. So all of that brings me back to the beginning statement that I said. They have gone as far as to cover up the windows. They have boarded up the windows of homes with women inside so that they literally cannot see the outside world. Not even through their fucking window. I'm sitting in front of my window right now, and I guess you can say that I'm taking it for granted 100% because I don't know what it's like to have access cut off. That is crazy to me. This goes even as far as like the new homes and structures that are being built are not allowed to have windows that are facing anywhere a person can see into. Again, the Taliban tries to claim that this is about women's safety and about like protecting women's honor and stuff, but you're literally just telling us and like the rest of the world that you are a bunch of fucking fiendish animals and you can't control yourselves around women. You're sick fucks. You're sick fucks. Apparently, according to them, a woman doing normal acts such as like, you know, going to the well to get some fucking water or seeing women working in kitchens can lead to obscene acts. By this logic, you should just lock up the men. The men should be the ones to be put on lockup. Like, are you kidding me? They're the ones that have no self-control. The ones who have no self-control should be the ones behind the bars, right? Am I wrong? No? Apparently I am. And this part, I honestly can't remember if it's like factual or not, but I do remember hearing that the Afghan women are not allowed to speak in public anymore. Like fully, they are not allowed to use their voice in a public space because if a man is to hear a woman's like cadence or voice, that can lead to obscene acts as well. Lock them up. Fucking lock them up. I just don't see how more people don't realize that men truly are the problem. This is not just a horrifying story. This is somebody's horrifying reality in this very moment because of men. Let's just sit with that for a minute. Because of men.
Say this and I'll say it again. Lock your doors before going to bed. Like, it's just that simple. Now, Crystal, as a child, had always locked her door before bed. Now, she knew that if anything happened, her parents wouldn't be able to get in, but she did not care. For the reason being is that every night around 3 o'clock in the morning, her bedroom door would open by itself and there would be nobody there. And it would wake her up to the point where she would just be frozen, like paralyzed out of fear that whoever was on the other side of the door was going to get her. Now, every time the door opened, there was nobody there. It would just stay open all night long. And then right before sunrise, it would close. The moment the sun came out, and she couldn't understand what was going on. And she would tell her parents about it all of the time. But of course, they didn't believe her. They just thought maybe it was her imagination. She was dreaming it. You know, kids make up things according to these parents. Was that the moment she started locking her door would be shaken every single night viciously, to the point that it felt like her door was going to fall off the hinges. Not only that, but her doorknob would just shake and shake and shake. She says she doesn't understand who has the energy to shake a doorknob from 3 to 6, but whatever this was, that's exactly what it would do every single night. And she couldn't scream. She couldn't say anything because her parents didn't believe her. So she would just sit up in bed, terrorized every single night by someone or something trying to get in her room. And she was literally deciding, should I just leave my door unlocked that night? Because either way, it doesn't show itself. It just opens my door and closes it at 6. So what am I supposed to do? And honestly, at that point, I would just sleep in bed with my parents or sleep on their floor or something and not sleep in that room. But she said she didn't have that option. She only could sleep in her room, and that was that. So I felt really bad for her when she said that. When she became a teenager, the activity kind of slowed down to the point that she could sleep with her door unlocked and the door wouldn't open. And she kind of let it go, thought that maybe it really was in her imagination and it never really happened. But she said that when she moved away to college is when everything started all over again. And she couldn't understand what was happening. She felt as though whatever it was, it followed her all the way to college. This all happened to her during spring break. Now, most people during spring break either go home or either are partying or go out of state. She and her roommate decided to stay behind and stay in the dorms because, of course, there were parties on campus, but as well as there was nobody around. So it was kind of comforting for both of them. So that one night that she decided to stay alone in the dorm because she didn't want to go to a party with her roommate, is when it all happened. She said that she was in her room and she could hear the door rattle a little bit. And she walked down the hallway and she looked towards the door. And that's when she realized that the door handle was moving slowly from left to right, from left to right. And she kind of froze and said, "Hello?" And the doorknob stopped. And she thought maybe it was my roommate. Maybe she's trying to get in and she's drunk. It is 3:00 in the morning. So she says hello again. And at that point, when she said hello again, that's when the door began to viciously shake again, just like when she was a kid. Shake, 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 shake so bad that she kind of jumped back and freaked out because it triggered a memory of her past. So at that point, she grabbed her phone and she's like, "Who's there?" And no answer. The door began to shake viciously, shake viciously, shake viciously, like the door handle was going to fall off, like the door was going to fall off the hinges, just like when she was a kid. And she kept telling the person, "Who are you? Who are you?" And there was no answer at all. She said that the door kept shaking and she could hear this time a heavy breathing on the other side of the door. Now, the door in her dorm room did not have a little peephole for her to look. So she decided to put one of her little mirrors underneath the door. When she was able to adjust the mirror so much so that she can see who's on the other side of the door, she said she saw a man dressed in black trying to break into her dorm. And that's when she freaked out. And the man noticed the mirror and tried to step on it, and she pulled it back and she decided to run to her room and lock the door. When she locked the door to her room is when she heard the door swing open. She grabbed the nearest chair she had in the room and put it right underneath the doorknob. And she said, "I'm calling 911. She put 911 on speaker. And the man, I guess, heard her on the phone with 911 and he ran back out the door. She said that night changed her life forever because it all made sense to her. When she was a kid, she was basically seeing the future. And that's what she says that she thinks those night terrors were. They were preparing her for the future. Because after that, she said she never heard the door rattle again, swing open again, viciously shake again. She associates her experience to her having premonitions of her future that saved her life. Do you guys think do you guys think it was premonitions preparing her for the future? Or do you think that she just had bad luck and she was at the wrong place at the wrong time?
Did I have an imaginary friend or was it a ghost? Spooky story time. A follower named Ashley sent me this story, and she says that her whole childhood she remembers talking to this little girl that she would call Gina. Growing up, she lived with her parents, her older brother, and they all lived at their grandparents' house. When both of her grandparents died, they left them the house, so she lived there her entire life until she became an adult. And she says that she clearly, vividly remembers always playing with this little girl, and this little girl would talk to her. Wouldn't tell her anything scary. It was literally just playing dolls, playing tea party, all of the little girl kind of stuff. And she's 26 years old now, and for some reason she came across someone named Gina, and this kind of brought all sorts of memories back at her. Every weekend she goes and she visits her parents, and she said that she went and she was talking to her mom. They were both having drinks, and she brings this Gina girl up. So she tells her mom, "Hey mom, do you remember me talking about the little girl that I would play with? Her name was Gina." She starts going into detail with her mom. She's like, "Yes, I remember we would play. She would talk to me. She would ask me how my day at school went. But now I remember that she was always wearing the same outfit." As an adult, naturally, she's like, Was I imagining things? Was this a ghost? Like, what is going on? And her mom is looking at her and she's like, okay, I'm gonna let you finish, but what little girl are you talking about? And Ashley is adamant. She's like, Mom, I remember you asking me, what are you doing? Who are you talking to? And I would look at you and I would tell you, I'm playing with Gina. Her mom looks puzzled, and her neighbor was a lover of animals, loved dogs, loved cats. She even had pet ducks, pet roosters, and one of her cats had a lot of kittens. One would always migrate towards Ashley's house, and they pretty much kept it. They never gave her a name. Now, Ashley's mom is saying, I don't know what little girl that you're talking about, but I remember every time that I would ask you, hey, what are you doing? Who are you talking to? You would always say, I'm playing with Gina, but the cat was always there. Did you not name your cat Gina? And Ashley's like, we never named her anything. What are you talking about? So this whole time, Ashley's mom thought that every time that she said, oh, I'm playing with Gina, she meant the cat. And now as an adult, Ashley's like, there was a little girl in my room, always talking to me, always playing with me, and it wasn't the cat. It's insane because Ashley remembers literally years and years and years playing and talking to this little girl named Gina, and the whole time her mom thought she was talking about the cat. So now Ashley is like, okay, I don't know any information. I don't remember what she looked like. I don't really remember much. I just remember she was always wearing the same outfit, and as a little girl, you don't really think about stuff like that. But her concern is, okay, was this a ghost? Was this an imaginary friend? Like, let me know what you guys think. Thank you so much to Ashley for sending me this story. This is weird. As a mom, no thank you. If you guys have any spooky stories that you'd like for me to read, please send them via DM or email because I'd love to read them. And if you guys like all things spooky, scary, and paranormal, please make sure you follow.
Let's read a scary story together. I was strangled by a ghost. Don't know how else to describe it. Happened about 20 years ago. I was 15 at that time. I was at my boyfriend's house. It was a bright summer day, and we're chilling in his room watching films. He had got up to get snacks, and I had gotten up to put another film on, when he called my name from the doorway. As I turned to respond to him, I felt the distant sensation of an ice-cold hand grip my throat. I could feel the imprint of 4 fingers on one side and the thumb on the other side. My breathing was instantly and completely constricted. I scrambled at my throat instinctively to try and pull the hand away, but of course, nothing was there. My boyfriend saw that I was panicking and rushed over as I was desperately gasping for air, but could not take in a breath. He was panicking too, and kept saying, just breathe, as he was getting his phone out to call an ambulance. Then, on one of the just breathes, I was suddenly able to breathe again. I just sat there, shaking and crying afterwards. I asked him about 1 year later. He said it looked like a ghost walked through me. Not that he saw a ghost, but the way my whole body seemed to move involuntarily when it happened. I have no explanation. I have no medical conditions or allergies to this day. Nothing like it has ever happened again. I have never had a panic attack or anything resembling one. I can still remember how distinct the feeling of the hand was and how cold it was.
Oh my goodness. Guys, one of my followers, her name is Sheila. She sent this story in to me, and I am pretty sure this is one of the most up close and personal paranormal stories I have received. Sheila says that this takes place when she was 16 years old. She would also like to mention that the house that she grew up in always had a sinister atmosphere to it. Sheila actually met her husband while she was in high school. He was actually an army recruiter, and he had come to her school to talk to kids who might be interested in joining the service after they graduate. Sheila says that she and he started to talk, and the relationship escalated very quickly, and within just a few short months, he already had asked her to marry him. Okay, so everything was going great, but a few months later, he did have to be transferred back to Texas, where he was originally stationed. Obviously, this is absolutely heartbreaking for her. So the day before he left finally came that they needed to say their goodbyes, and they did so. And then he went to stay overnight at his parents' house, from where he would be waking up very early and leaving for Texas. And she went back to her house. She goes to her bedroom and she falls down into her bed and she is crying and sick to her stomach, thinking that it is going to be 6 months until she gets to see him again. Okay, and this is where it gets super freaking creepy. So she had been turned to face the wall while she was laying on her bed, and she's just crying, facing the wall. And then she kind of rolls over with her eyes closed. Now, once she's on her other side and she slowly opens her eyes, right in front of her face lies her boyfriend. Well, what looked like her boyfriend. She said, yes, it absolutely looked exactly like him, but she knew it was not her boyfriend. Okay, so Sheila says, I don't know how I stayed calm, but I did. And she slowly got up to get out of the bed, and he just follows her with his eyes and says, where are you going? No. And then she kind of holds her finger up, and as calmly as she can say it, she says, I'll be right back. And he was just like, okay. And she said, obviously, she knows it's not her boyfriend. She said she could see straight up evil looking back at her. Oh my God, guys, I have goosebumps all over about to say this. She said she had to climb up over this thing in her bed. She said it wasn't just something she saw. This was a physical being. She said she still, to this day, 41 years later, can still feel the feeling of having to crawl over something that should not be there. So she gets up out of bed and she starts almost running now to her mom and dad, crying hysterically. Gets to her mom and she tells her there is something in her bed and it looks like her boyfriend. So her mom jumps up and goes into the bedroom with Sheila, and guess what? Nothing was there. For many, many years, she says she tries to make sense of it. Like, what was that? And she said, yeah, sure, the house was haunted with little things here and there, but nothing has ever happened like that day. And she prays that nothing like that ever happens again. She does mention that her and her friends had played with the Ouija board many times, and she figures that something dark had to have been released from that, or so she thinks. Oh my goodness, so freaking creepy. Guys, let me know your thoughts in the comments. I am sure Sheila will be in there reading them as well. And please, if you have your own really creepy story, I gotta hear it. And if you're new here, don't forget to follow for more creepy story time.
A woman showed up at the nursing home where I work, and the patient she requested to see begged us not to let her in, and I was not prepared for what happened next. This spooky scary storytime submission was sent in from someone named Todd, and Todd says that he works as a CNA at a nursing home in a small town. He did not want to name the facility for obvious reasons, out of respect for his own job and the patients there, but he says last fall they had a patient named Mr. H who had been there for about 6 months. Mr. H did not have any behavioral issues. He did not show any signs of confusion as they see with some of their patients with dementia. Mr. H's problems were mostly physical. He was very old and he had had a few strokes. So he had trouble taking care of himself, and he was married. His wife would come and see him about 2 to 3 times a week. And he also had a daughter that lived out of state who Todd only saw a couple of times during Mr. H's stay. Todd said he didn't have any sort of special connection with Mr. H. He liked him well enough. He was calm, he was polite, and he also liked his wife, but she was distant, as if she was already grieving his passing before it even happened. She had a lot of problems herself and didn't drive, which is why she came and visited him so infrequently. Other than Mr. H's wife, he had no frequent visitors, which is why what happened stood out so much to Todd, because one afternoon, a woman walks in during visiting hours and she requests Mr. H by name. Todd happened to be nearby when he heard her ask for Mr. H, and he said that something about her just felt off. He can't put his finger on what, because she looked normal enough. She was probably early 40s. She was well dressed. She seemed calm and polite. There was something in her tone that suggested she was very confident and knew exactly why she was there, and she gave Mr. H's full name without hesitation. Todd goes back to tell Mr. H that he has a visitor, and he says there's a woman here that's asking to see you, and he said he's never seen someone's face and demeanor go from calm to panic that fast, and Mr. H says no, absolutely not, do not let her back. Todd says, don't you want to know who it is? And Mr. H says, no, tell her I'm not here. Tell her she has the wrong person. And Todd's just thinking that Mr. H is confused and he's trying to calm him down. He thinks it's paranoia, that Mr. H is going through some kind of episode. But Mr. H keeps insisting, not her, do not let her back. Todd doesn't know exactly what's going on, but he said at their facility, patients have the right to refuse visitors, so he goes back up to the front and he politely informs the woman that Mr. H is not up for seeing visitors. And she just smiles and she politely says, that's okay, I'll come back. The woman left without another word, and so Todd goes back to check on Mr. H and to find out what was going on with him, and he finds him sitting on the edge of his bed. The TV in his room was off, and Mr. H appeared visibly shaken and was just staring at the floor beneath his feet. Todd says, Mr. H, are you okay? Can I get you anything? Can I do anything for you? And Mr. H just pats the bed next to him and he says, sit down because I need to tell you a story because I don't have much time left. He says he remembers trying to lighten the mood a little, kind of laughs and says, don't worry, you have all the time in the world. She's gone. You can do whatever you want today. You don't have to have any visitors. We can do whatever you want. And Mr. H looks at him square in the eye and says, no, she's not gone. And he starts telling him the story that when he was young, he was held as a prisoner of war overseas in what he described as a work camp. He didn't even specify the war or where he was held. He said that the prison was mostly what you would expect. It was guards, it was labor, it was routine, but there was a woman there. None of the prisoners knew who she was. She didn't dress like the guards, but she clearly outranked them because they listened to everything she said. She spoke English, whereas most of the guards spoke another language. And she moved freely as she wanted at any hour between the prisoners and the guards, and nobody stopped her. When Mr. H first arrived at the prison, other prisoners told him to avoid her because she knew things like their names, their histories, where they were from. One prisoner at the camp was even insistent that she could read his thoughts, but nobody knew how. He told Todd that while in the prison, most of the prisoners tried to stay invisible. They kept their heads down, they did their jobs, they tried not to draw attention to themselves. They just tried to survive. But one afternoon, something happened, and Mr. H was working, and another younger prisoner collapsed in the yard. He said this kid was around his age, which was barely a teenager, and he collapses, and they didn't know if it was dehydration or exhaustion, but the guards didn't care, and everyone was expected to carry on working. But Mr. H couldn't help it, and he went over to help him. He said he knew that the kid was still breathing, and so he broke formation, and the guards were screaming at him to get back to work, to leave him. Mr. H said he wanted to help him because the kid looked like his brother. And so he tried to lift him, but he couldn't. So he ended up dragging him from the yard to a shaded area underneath a tree. He said there wasn't much he could do at the time, but getting him out of the sun was just what he thought to do. And the guards were still screaming, and he was waiting for a blow or a punishment or something to happen. But then all of the yelling stopped. And that's when he noticed the woman, and she was standing off to the side of the yard, and she was just watching what was happening. He was watching him standing over this kid underneath the tree, and another guard started yelling at him to get back in formation. 2 more guards chimed in, but the woman walks over to the guards and she says something to them, and all the shouting stops. Mr. H says that no punishment or consequence came. They let him tend to the kid. The kid unfortunately did not end up surviving, but that night the woman came to Mr. H. He tells Todd, she sat down next to me the way you're sitting next to me now, and she told me you won't die here. Said there was a kindness in his voice that he hadn't experienced the entire time he had been at the camp, but she told him, you'll get to leave, just not now. I asked her what she meant, and she said, I don't want to get into that now, but I'll come back for you when it's time. And then she left. But from that day forward, he started noticing a pattern. Anytime someone broke the unspoken rules, like they shared their food or they helped someone in the yard, she appeared and she'd be watching from a distance, and then she would approach that person. And those people who she came and spoke with disappeared one by one, and nobody else in the camp knew where they went. But it wasn't like the others, because if someone died there, you knew when it happened. You usually saw it. Said whatever was going on with this woman was different. I think she chose them. I think she chose them not to suffer and not to stay. He told Todd he didn't know who she was, but he believed that she was the one who decided who got to leave the camp. But eventually he was rescued. He got home from the war. He went on to get married and have his daughter. Tells Todd he's never forgotten the woman, but he spent the rest of his life hoping that he imagined the whole thing, hoping that he would never see her again. But then he says, but then I saw her and I knew it was my time. And Todd says, where did you see her? And Mr. H says, that was her at the desk. And Todd says, that's impossible. This was years ago. This woman couldn't have been older than like 42, 43. And Mr. H says, no, it's her, because she hasn't aged a day. Says he remembers getting a chill as the words left Mr. H's lips, but he told himself that it was just a story that Mr. H was telling himself due to what he had been through and PTSD. But then Mr. H grabs his hand and says, if she comes back, please don't let her in. He said he didn't really know what to say to that, but assured Mr. H that he didn't have to see any visitors that he didn't want to. And Mr. H said, okay, I think I'll take a nap now. And Todd left his room. He goes home that night, and when he comes back to work the next day, he's informed that Mr. H has sadly passed in his sleep. There was no signs of distress or trauma. Was peaceful as far as Todd knows, but he says that he was immediately curious, and he went to the front desk and he asked if he had had any visitors, and they told him no. He said he checked the visitor's log anyway, and what was curious about that was there hadn't been any visitors that day, but he went back the day before to check the woman's name, and he saw that she had signed in, which he didn't remember her doing, but next to her name, she had written her relationship to Mr. H, and she wrote, "An old friend." He ended his message by saying, "I don't know what to believe. I work in healthcare and I'm used to explaining things away with a logical explanation, but I do know that I saw that look on his face and that he believed that she would come back." Somehow he says he thinks she did. This is Spooky Scary Storytime, the series where we share listeners' allegedly true stories about the creepiest or most unsettling things that they've ever experienced. If you have a story, we would love to hear it. Please send it in.
Teachers from Hell story time. So when I was in elementary school, I had a teacher who was an absolute nightmare. On the first day of school, I sat down, had my head up, paying attention. She was doing like name calls. She looked at me and said, "Your last name is this?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "Oh, you're so-and-so's daughter. Oh, you're so-and-so's niece. Yeah, I taught your daddy and your uncle." And me being a kid, I thought, oh, cool, maybe that's a good thing. No, it wasn't. She hated my dad and my uncle. Therefore, she hated me too. She gets up and walks over to my desk and says, "Hopefully I don't have the same problems with you that I had with them." I didn't exactly know just how bad this was going to be until it started. And let me just say, in elementary school, I was not a bad kid. I got my butt tore up at home, so I knew if I misbehaved at school, I was going to get a lot worse at home. I did not act up in class. This woman had anger issues, and I mean, if you couldn't answer a question right there on the spot, even if it was something you were just learning, she would instantly get angry. I can't tell you how many kids she drug out of class and paddled them because they got a math problem wrong. So we were in a very young grade. We were just learning how to add and subtract, and she would start us off with these big ass numbers, and I had no idea what I was doing. I've never been good at math, so I struggled. But of course, who do you think she called to the front? Me. It was like it was her life's mission to embarrass me in front of everyone, and I hated it. She would wait until you sat down, and then she would say whether it was right or wrong, and then have you come back up to the front and yell at you while you're trying to figure it out instead of helping you. So as a small kid, you're standing in front of the whole class, shaking, tearing up, don't know what to do, and she's yelling at you at what to do, and you're not getting it because you're so freaking scared. She thought that fear would make us learn better or faster, but it didn't. It actually made it worse. Mid-year, she comes in class one day and says, "I'm gonna give y'all a test. You're gonna do these 4 math pages with 25 questions on each, and you got 30 minutes to finish it. Oh, you gotta show your work, and if you get more than 3 wrong, I'm gonna paddle you in the class." I already knew my ass was getting tore up because I could not do math that quick. By the end of the test, nobody had completed it. Even the smarter kids, they were on the second page. Like, you just couldn't move that fast. We're kids. She took our whole class and walked us down to the principal's office and wanted him to paddle us one by one, and he said no. He said, "Not only do I not have time to paddle 20, 30 something students, but that just don't make sense. You're paddling them for not finishing a test, and this test is 4 pages long. Like, no, we're not going to do that. Go back to class." And you would have thought the principal would have gotten on to her about her crazy erratic behavior, but he didn't. He just sent us all back to class. So now we're sitting there and she says, "Oh, well, if he won't paddle you, I guess I will." So she brought us up one by one in front of the class. And she had a paddle that had been broke so many times, white tape was wrapped around it. Y'all, let me tell you something. When I was a kid, I was a big snitch. And if somebody did something like that to me, I'm going straight to my daddy. But just happened that day, my mom was home first, so I went to her. When I told my mom what happened that day, she immediately called the school, demanded answers, could not believe this had happened. The next morning, my mom sends me to get on the bus, so I'm like, oh, okay, well, she's not going out there. They must just not going to worry about it. So I go to school. I'm sitting in class when all of a sudden, not only my parents show up, but multiple other parents, and they are raising teetotal hell about this teacher spanking all of us because we either didn't know the problem or couldn't finish the test within the time frame that she gave us. And these parents were not happy. I mean, they were yelling, screaming, beating on the door, demanding the principal fire her, but he didn't. That teacher was always protected. I don't know if it's because she'd been there so long or maybe she knew the principal personally. Even back when my dad had her as a teacher, she got away with a lot. And I mean, that woman beat us like she was kin to us, and nothing was ever done about it. So by the end of the year, we take our end of the grade test and I passed it, but then find out I still failed my grade because she failed me, along with 18 or 19 other students, and the parents were pissed. So the next day or so, I go to school, and when we pull up on the bus, we see parents lined up all the way outside the front door. And I mean, there are tons of people out there raising hell about all these kids being failed. Now, some of the parents knew the principal, and they were able to get their kids passed anyways, but mine weren't because they didn't like my parents. So of course, I was failed. The next year, she made our lives even more of a living hell, but then eventually, towards the middle of the year, she was out of school for a good 6 months, and we had an assistant teacher, and that woman was so sweet, and she helped us understand the work. Thank God for that woman. I passed. Like, she would take the time to put us in side groups, the ones who learned it over here and the ones who didn't understand it over here, and she would work with us one-on-one and have the kids who did get it work with us one-on-one, like tutoring, and it helped.
Someone named Jake sent us an email to tell us about their experience in the Paris catacombs. Jake said that this happened in about '02, and he was studying abroad. He ended up falling in with this friend group of locals, After a while, he said it did take them a while, they do become comfortable with Jake, and they end up telling him that they are urban explorers. They go into the catacombs in these sections that are not open to the public, and they urban explore, aka cataphiles. After they tell Jake this, they do end up inviting him to go. Jake says, I immediately agree. I'm into morbid stuff like that. I had been into the tourist portions of the catacombs, but I'd never been into anything that wasn't open to the public. The time comes when they're all going to go down into the catacombs. They suit Jake up with a headlamp, a flashlight, extra batteries, a backpack of supplies just in case, some water. And Jake says they go to this back road. And he says that where they go to enter the catacombs, if you didn't know what you were looking for, you wouldn't be able to find it. They all get geared up and they head in. Jake says when he gets down there, he's expecting like a labyrinth, just this awe-inspiring like magnitude of morbidity and craziness. And he says he's just completely underwhelmed because it's just a tunnel. They all kind of start to shuffle along. They put Jake in the middle. Leading the group is a guy who he says that we can call Mark. And judging by how Mark was walking and where he was going, what he could see from the headlamp, Mark had done this like a lot. This was the guy that you were going to follow. This was the guy who knew his way around. That they are shuffling along for a while, and then the tunnels start to kind of open up, and he says at that point he starts to see bones stacked, skulls, femurs, long bones, and he said it all looked very deliberate, it all looked very ancient. As they continue on, Jake says he starts to see things that don't really look ancient, like there are half-burnt candles that are kind of like sitting on the wall, and then he sees a crate with a blanket tucked into it, kind of like in an alcove where it would stay dry. This does definitely look out of place to Jake, so he does end up asking the girl behind him, do people live down here, do people stay down here? The guy leading the group, Mark, must have heard him, so he responds and he just laughs, and he's just kind of like, that's why you just don't go into the deeper part of the catacombs. He says that the girl behind him just kind of touches his elbow, and she just says, people come down here all the time. They just leave stuff so that they don't have to bring it with them. Not a big deal. It's normal. Continue to walk along for a while. Jake says, I'm just taking everything in. As they get farther into the catacombs, the noise of the city really does just completely disappear. You don't hear anything. You don't feel anything. No vibrations, no noise, nothing. And it's so dark, not like turn your light off in your room dark or walking down an unlit street dark, just dark, where their headlamps were on, but it was like the darkness just ate the light. I'm claustrophobic. I could never. He says that they continue on even longer. Everyone is very quiet at this point. There's no talking. All you can really hear is the shuffling of their feet. Eventually they start hearing noise coming from up ahead. It sounds like muffled talking. They can hear feet shuffling. Jake is thinking, okay, maybe we're meeting up with people. Maybe this is our destination. But he says that the guy leading the group, Mark, gets very still, very quiet, holds his hand up, tells everybody to stop. They all stand there and they listen for a little while. Mark turns around and he tells everyone to turn their headlamps off. Jake said, I don't immediately spring into action. I'm the last one. And Mark actually looks at him and like, off. So Jake shuts his headlamp off and they just kind of stand there for a while. And they can hear these voices getting closer. They can hear the shuffling getting closer. But there's no light coming from where this noise is coming from down the tunnel. They all stand there, they're very quiet, even their breathing is controlled, they're not moving, nothing. As they're standing there looking down this tunnel, Jake says he sees a flashlight flash 2 times. Then it's just complete darkness again, and this voice bellows out, I know you're there, so you can just go on ahead and come out. The light turns on and starts panning across the tunnel, and Jake says that the light lands on them. So Mark flips his headlamp back on, as well as the rest of the group, and they're shining it down this tunnel, and Jake says that what he sees standing there are 3 men. He says these men are definitely older than him. They look to be mid to late 30s, very disheveled, very dirty, super pale, like they hadn't seen the sun in forever. So these men proceed to walk closer to Jake and his group of friends that he's with. It gets to the point of where these men are about 5-6 feet away from Jake and his group, and he says that he's looking at them. They are definitely dirty. They are definitely disheveled. They are super pale, even paler than they looked from down the tunnel. Then they just end up saying to Jake and this group of friends that he's with, you're off route. He says that Mark, the leader of the group, just sighs and tells them we were just leaving. He said that the guy who was obviously kind of the leader of this other group kind of tilts his head like he's listening for something that no one else can hear, and he just kind of stares at them. Mark once again tells him, like, look, we're headed out. He says he is watching these guys intently. Once again, the leader of this other group just looks at them and just says, you shouldn't be here. Not angry, not condescending, just like a you need to get out of here. He says that as he's watching this other group talk and he's watching Mark speak and he's looking at the rest of their group, he realizes that as his group is breathing, there's the fog that comes out, like you can see their breath, whereas this other group, they're breathing, they're talking, there was nothing. There was no condensation that was coming out with their breathing or talking. He says that the guy leading their group, Mark, once again just tells these guys, we're headed out, like we're not staying here, we're going. The leader of this other group looks at all of them and just says, then go. Mark says, okay. And they start to walk down the hallway, but these guys do not move. So the friend group is going to have to shuffle past them, and this is not a large tunnel. Mark passes them without incident. The next person passes. It comes Jake's turn. He passes, and he says that as he passes them, it becomes even colder than it was in the other parts of the tunnel. No explanation for that. As soon as he passes them, it warms back up. Like, it's not warm, but it's warmer than it was around these guys. So Jake's whole group gets past these guys, and then these three guys start to follow them. Their headlamps are not on, so they are only traveling by the light of Jake and his friend group. Jake says that they follow them for a while. They are not taking the same route that they took in, obviously, and he says that even a few times, Mark stops and kind of hesitates on how to get out of the catacombs. Jake says that the three guys who are following he and his friend group, they never turn their flashlights on. They're just traveling by the headlamps of Jake and his friend group. Eventually, their footsteps do stop, so they do not hear them following them any longer. He says at that point, Mark does start to speed up to get them out of there. He said that without following Mark, there's no way that the average person could find their way out of this absolute labyrinth. From a completely different direction, they do end up finding the exit, so they do get out of the catacombs. Jake says when they're out of there, he breathes this giant sigh of relief. He hadn't even realized that his adrenaline was just pumping this whole time. Once everyone is out and everyone has calmed down, Jake says, I do ask Mark, the guy who was leading us, what was that about? Like, who were those people? He says he doesn't really get an explanation. The only thing that Mark says is there are people who explore down there, and then there are people who use it. The rest of the time that Mark was studying abroad, he was still friends with this friend group, but like I said, he never went into the catacombs with them again, and Mark and the other friends never elaborated on what those men were down there doing. He said that they had told him stories of things that they had come across, however, he cannot verify anything because he didn't see it with his own eyes. For example, they told Jake that they had come to a big room once, a bigger-ish room in these catacombs while they were exploring, and in there they found bones arranged in a circle and carvings on some of the rocks on the wall, like someone was practicing or trying to get something right. Hot candles half burnt down, wax dripped everywhere. Said he did ask them, do people live down there? He asked them that again after they had been hanging out for a while and not going into the catacombs, and they told him people can't really live down there because there's no resources, there's no water, there's no food, and there are police officers who do patrol these tunnels, so you can't build a home down there. They have found rooms with furniture and makeshift living arrangements, but you can't actually live in the catacombs. You gotta come up for air. Jake told me that that is one of the weirdest experiences that he's ever had, but he's never, ever going back to the catacombs.
In the early 1900s, jazz music could have saved your life. Welcome back to Creepy History, where we discuss stories from the past that are still unsettling today. And today we are talking about the Axeman of New Orleans. Let's get into it. The Axeman of New Orleans was an unidentified serial who was active in and around New Orleans, Louisiana between May 1918 and October 1919. The attacker was never identified, leaving his crimes unsolved. As the title implies, the victims were attacked with an axe, which often belonged to the victim. In most of the cases, investigators discovered that the intruder used a chisel to remove the panels off the back doors, where he would then enter the home. He would also leave the chisel and panel on the floor next to the broken door. The intruder would then attack his victims with an axe or a straight razor. Items were never removed from the victims' homes, making it clear that his crimes were not motivated by robbery. Most of the Axeman's victims were Italian immigrants or Italian Americans, making many believe that the crimes were ethnically motivated. This also made many believe that maybe this had something to do with the mafia. Crime analysts suggested that maybe the crimes were schmexually motivated, believing that he only took the lives of men if they were in the way of the true victim, which is the woman. Less likely theory is that he did all of this to promote jazz music, since he wrote a letter saying he would spare the lives of those who played jazz music in their homes. On March 13th, 1919, a letter from the Axeman was published in the newspapers, and this is what it said. Hell, March 13th, 1919. Esteemed mortal, they have never caught me and they never will. They have never seen me, for I am invisible, even as the ether that surrounds your earth. I am not a human being, but a spirit and a demon from the hottest hell. I am what you Orleanians and you foolish police call the Axemen. When I see fit, I shall come and claim other victims. I alone know whom they shall be. I shall leave no clue except my bloody axe, besmeared with blood and brains, of he whom I have sent below to keep me company. If you wish, you may tell the police to be careful not to rile me. Of course, I am a reasonable spirit. I take no offense at the way they have conducted their investigations in the past. In fact, they have been so utterly stupid as to not only amuse me, but His Satanic Majesty, Francis Joseph, etc. But tell them to beware. Let them not try to discover what I am, for it were better that they were never born than to incur the wrath of the Axemen. I don't think there is any need of such a warning, for I feel sure the police will always dodge me as they have in the past. They are wise and know how to keep away from all harm. Undoubtedly, you Orleanians think of me as a most horrible murderer, which I am, but I could be much worse if I wanted to. If I wished, I could pay a visit to your city every night. At will, I could slay thousands of your best citizens, for I am in close relationship with the Angel of Death. Now, to be exact, at 12:15 earthly time, on next Tuesday night, I'm going to pass over New Orleans. In my infinite mercy, I'm going to make a little proposition to you people. Here it is. I am very fond of jazz music, and I swear by all the devils in the nether regions that every person shall be spared in whose home a jazz band is in full swing at the time I have just mentioned. If everyone has a jazz band going, well then, so much the better for you people. One thing is certain, and that is that some of your people who do not jazz it out on that specific Tuesday night, if there be any, will get the axe. Well, as I am cold and crave the warmth of my native Tartarus, and it is about time I leave your earthly home, I will seize my discourse, hoping that thou wilt publish this, that I may go well with thee. I have been, am, and will be the worst spirit that ever existed either in fact or realm of fantasy. The Axemen. After the public read the letter, on the night of March 19th, all of the city's dance halls were filled to capacity, and both professional and amateur bands played jazz music at parties at hundreds of houses around town. Ironically, there were no attacks that night. But before the letter hit the media and people knew how to keep the Axemen away from them, there were unfortunately many victims who did not get the same warning. Joseph and Catherine Maggio were taken from this planet on May 23, 1918. The Axemen broke into their home and took their lives with an axe and a straight razor. Joseph was an Italian grocer. Sadly, they did not survive. June 27, 1918, Louis Bessumer and his mistress Harriet Lowe were attacked with an axe at the back of a grocery store. They both survived. August 5th, 1918, Anna Schneider, who was 8 months pregnant, woke up to find a dark figure standing over her. She was then violently attacked, but luckily she survived and gave birth to a healthy baby girl 2 days later. August 10th, 1918, Joseph Romano was attacked in his bedroom, but his 2 sisters in the next room actually heard this commotion and ran into his room, where they saw him lying there and the attacker quickly exiting. They were able to give a bit of a description on the attacker: dark-skinned, heavy-set man who wore a dark suit and a slouched hat. Sadly, 2 days after the attack, Joseph Romano passed from his injuries. And arguably, the worst case was the Cortimiglia family. The Axemen broke into their home on the night of March 10th, 1919, where he attacked Charles, his wife Rosie, and their daughter Mary. I can't say a whole lot on here, but their baby Mary did not make it, although her parents did. On August 10th, 1919, Steve Boca was attacked while he slept in his room. Boca had awoken to the intruder attacking him, and he did survive, thankfully, but he was unable to remember any details of the attack. September 3rd, 1919, Sarah Lawman was attacked in her apartment. Her neighbors actually broke into her apartment when Sarah wasn't answering. They found her unconscious on her bed with head injuries, and luckily she did survive, but was unable to remember any details. October 17th, 1919, the wife of Mike Pepitone was awoken by a noise, and she ran to her husband's bedroom, so assuming they have separate bedrooms, where she saw a large axe-wielding man fleeing the scene. Her husband Mike had been struck by the axe and sadly lost his life. His wife was unable to remember any details other than the attacker was large. Some speculate that the Axeman was Frank Doc Mumphrey, who owned Mumphrey's Garden District jazz business. Apparently his business was struggling, but started doing amazingly well after the entire city was basically threatened and bullied into listening to jazz music, meaning after all of these horrible events, his business was booming all of a sudden. And that could be just because people were panicking and hiring jazz bands and buying jazz music to put in their homes. But I do wonder, was this all a plan of his? I don't really know about that, but it is something to think about. I also find it very interesting that a lot of the victims were not able to remember anything. Like, they didn't remember anything. And I know they went through something so horrible and scary and traumatizing, but I do find it interesting that, like, nobody has any more details on this man other than the fact that he is large. Anyway, now we both know the story of the Axeman of New Orleans. I'd also really love to hear y'all's thoughts on this case, so leave those down below in the comments and let me know what creepy history you want me to talk about next.
Hello and welcome back to a series of spooky stories, The Haunted Tea Spill. This series is brought to you by all things spooky and ungodly amounts of paranormal activity. The necklace, it's cute. It's down here if you want. Yes, I am. Now onto the story. Hello, my name is Nay, and when I was a kid, I could see and hear spirits. My mom has tons of stories about my encounters, but this one surpasses them all. The best of the best, eh? This story takes place when I was 9 years old. It was late at night, and my family and I were all asleep. I woke up to the sound of a man's voice calling my name. A man? I thought it was strange because the only people in the house were me, my mom, my little sister, and my cousin Angel. I tried to go back to sleep, thinking it might be someone outside, but I kept hearing the man's voice call my name. I would have made that everybody's problem. Everybody's going to wake the fuck up, and we're just gonna burn the place to the ground. So I got up and walked into the hallway. Why would you do that? The voice seemed to be coming from my little sister's room. It was summertime, so my cousin Angel was staying in my sister's room while my little sister slept in my mom's room. I walked in and saw a black male figure sitting on the side of the bed. At that moment, my cousin woke up, looked at me, and said, "Nay." The figure then turned its head and looked towards me. I didn't show any fear because it wasn't the first time that I had seen spirit. Okay. I noticed the figure had shiny emerald green eyes and a wide smile. Bitch. What the fuck? What do you mean? It slowly placed a finger over its mouth, signaling for me to stay quiet. No. No, absolutely not. Without saying a word, I turned around and went back to bed. Fuck your cousin, I guess, right? What the Just, you go to sleep after seeing that? My cousin never talked about it the next morning or in the days after. Fast forward to when I was 16, my cousin Justin, my mom, and I were all talking about experiences with spirits when I was younger. During the conversation, Justin brought up a time that I scared my cousin Angel. As he told the story, I suddenly remembered the black figure. I explained what I saw that night. When I got to the part about the emerald green eyes, my cousin freaked out and said, "You saw him." Bitch, what do you mean? Did you see him too? And you just... What? Confused, I asked who he was. My cousin then explained that months before Angel came to stay with us, she and a friend had played with a Ouija board. You know what? She deserved to fend for herself. After getting bored trying to contact someone, they stopped and put it away. They didn't say goodbye. They shouldn't have touched it to begin with, but they didn't say goodbye. Jesus. The next night, Angel was home alone and heard footsteps in the hallway. She got up to check, thinking that someone had come home, but nobody was there. The following night, she was lying in bed and couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her. She was too scared to move, so she closed her eyes and forced herself to sleep. For several months, Angel continued to hear footsteps when she was alone and constantly felt watched. One night, while lying in bed, she heard footsteps walk to the other side of the bed, and it felt as if someone sat beside her. I can't... If this ever happened, Lord, if this ever happens to me, I would not live to tell the tale. She contacted her friend and told her everything. Her friend believed that something had attached itself to her whenever they used the Ouija board. Well, no shit, Sherlock. They searched online for ways to get rid of unwanted spirits and learned that burning the board could break the attachment. So, they burned the Ouija board in their friend's backyard fire pit. That same night, Angel went home thinking that everything was fine. It's never fine. Until she walked into her room and saw a black figure standing in the corner with shiny emerald green eyes. After that, she continued to live with the spirit, but only told my cousin Justin. To this day, that spirit still follows her. As for me, I haven't seen him since that night. What the fuck? Please stop playing with those fucking boards. Please stop. I'm begging you. I'm begging all of you to stop doing that. Or at least be responsible. Oh, I digress. Rate it on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the least scary, creepy, spooky, 10 being the most. Again, on a factor of 1 to I would shit my britches, I would be shitting my britches. Before I go, if any of you live in the Wichita Falls area, I will have a vendor's booth at the Vendor's Paradise with all of my rehab apparel clothing. I was going to say rehab apparel, but that sounded really fucking stupid. I know that a lot of people haven't seen it because anytime I've tried to post it on here, it just doesn't do very well. I upcycle clothes. And I went to attend this event last year, but it rained really, really bad. And the ground was like sopping wet and muddy. And I did not want to risk my clothes falling on the ground. So they offered everyone who ended up leaving that day a free booth. So I'm going to be there this weekend on Saturday. So again, if you're in the Wichita Falls area and you want to go to a cute little vendor marketplace type situation that's outdoors, you need something to do, come out there. And if you have a story of your own that you want to submit, you can do so on the link tree in my profile. I will see you all at the next episode. Stay spooky, friends.
Weird spooky story time and more hauntings in the outlets. This story was left in my comments by Stacy. I work at the outlets as an assistant manager. Although I've never seen anything, I've definitely heard things, like heavy footsteps, almost like construction worker boots. Some of my girls and my manager have seen a black figure by one of our shelves in the back. I even brought holy water to bless the store, and a couple days later, my girls saw the figure again. There was a time I was closing with one of my girls. I was near the front door when I heard what sounded like someone turning the lock. We looked at each other, and I told her, "Turn on the alarm, let's get the heck out of here." Mind you, it was only 9:15, and we were closing for the day. My manager has told me stories about how the previous assistant would hear things moving. We have boxes in the back with product on the shelves, and it sound like they're being shifted around, like someone is going through them. Sometimes my coworker and I will be talking and will hear or even see things fall over. There was also a time I was working by myself before my coverage came in, and I heard what sounded like a kid's toy going off, but there was no one there. Another time I was sitting in the parking lot, and the little mechanical car right in front of the Levi's was on and with no one around. Okay, that's weird. And lastly, I remember being in the back separating SKUs when I heard a clear hello. I ran to the front. My girls saw my face and knew I was scared. I asked if anyone had been in the back, and they said, "No, it was just you." I always feel like someone is watching me when I'm in the back room, so I just run. I'm honestly scared to actually see something, so I just pray in my head and hope I don't. I have so many stories, and to those reading, I'm so sorry this is all over the place. I'm just typing as I remember things. Don't be sorry. We love weird, spooky stories, and this is so wild and so consistent with what people are saying they experience working in the outlets. Let me know if any of you have any thoughts on this, or if you've had any weird, spooky stories. Send them my way.
At around 5 p.m. on the evening of October 27, 2017, a 29-year-old woman named Alexia Duval drove her car down a cul-de-sac in the small, quiet town of Gray, France. She was on her way to her parents' house to celebrate her nephew's second birthday, and it was going to be this big family get-together. Her sister, her brother-in-law, and her little nephew had come in all the way from Paris, which was about a 4-hour drive away. But Alexia realistically had mixed feelings about seeing them all tonight. So Alexia had been going through a pretty hard time recently. She and her husband of 13 years, Jonathan, have been trying to get pregnant, and so she'd done several rounds of fertility treatments, which had thrown her hormones completely out of whack and seemed to affect her a lot more than was typical for most women. And then finally, when all that had led to her actually getting pregnant, she unfortunately had miscarried just a couple of months ago. And so even though Alexia loved her sister's family and got along with them really well, her miscarriage was still really fresh in her mind. And she just knew it was going to be very difficult for her to be around her young nephew. It was just a reminder of what she had lost. Now, Alexia came to a stop outside of a gated driveway at the end of the cul-de-sac, and she rang the intercom. And then when the gate opened up, she drove up the driveway toward a nice house with a very well-kept garden. She parked her car in the driveway behind her father's white van and then got out of her car. She grabbed a wrapped present out of the back seat, along with a couple of desserts that she'd made, carried them up to the house, and rang the doorbell. And a few seconds later, her mother, Isabelle Fouillot, answered the door with a big smile and led her into the dining room where Alexia's father, Jean-Pierre, sat at the table, talking with Alexia's brother-in-law, Gregory, and also her sister, Stephanie. They all stood up and they greeted her, and then as Alexia began to explain that her husband Jonathan was running late and he'd be here later in a separate car because the job he'd been working that day as an electrician had run long, As she was saying all that, Alexia heard the sound of little feet making their way towards her. A moment later, her 2-year-old nephew, James, ran around the corner and threw his arms around Alexia's legs. And surprisingly, to Alexia's relief, she didn't feel sadness. All she felt was happiness. And so she bent down and scooped him up and gave the boy a big hug, and then she also handed him his birthday present. Eventually, the group settled in for dinner, and for a while, all of Alexia's worries just kind of faded away. She was really close with everybody at the table, especially her mother and her sister Stephanie, and being around them always put her in a good mood. Alexia's husband, Jonathan, finally arrived sometime around 8:30, and he, along with the rest of the group, had a wonderful night, eating and drinking and chatting. After dinner was cleaned up, Alexia's father did go to bed, but everybody else stayed up, and they all just continued having this nice time until around 11 p.m., when Alexia said it was really time for her and Jonathan to head home. They both had early mornings ahead of them. Jonathan had some errands to run in the morning, and Alexia was hoping to get a workout in. A few minutes later, on the drive home, Alexia sat in the passenger seat of Jonathan's car. She'd left her own car at her parents' house because she'd been drinking, and she was planning to pick it up when they came back the next day. Alexia and Jonathan's house was on a quiet residential street, only about a mile away from Alexia's parents' house. And as they made their way down the road, Alexia glanced out the window at a particular house that was just up the street from where they lived. And as she looked at it, she frowned. The neighbor who lived in that house had an adult grandson who had been harassing Alexia all summer. He'd been obsessed with her and would call and text her constantly, to the point where Alexia didn't feel safe even going out for a jog around the block when she was by herself. Now, fortunately, the harassment had stopped a couple of months ago, but only because the man had been committed to a mental hospital. But Alexia didn't really know how long it would be until he got out again. Or if he'd already been released, she didn't know. So it just sort of felt like a reprieve, not a long-term solution. But on this night at least, there was nobody peering out at her from the neighbor's window. A minute later, their car pulled into their garage, and Alexia and Jonathan got out. And as Alexia went from the garage into the main house, she passed by a treadmill in the corner of the garage, which had broken down a few weeks ago. She asked Jonathan if he'd gotten around to fixing it yet, and he said no. Alexia just sighed. It was supposed to be a very cold and gloomy morning the next day, and so it looked like she was going to have to run outside. The following morning, around 11 a.m., Jonathan walked up to the door of Alexia's parents' house and rang the doorbell. And as he did, he sort of gave a worried look over his shoulder at Alexia's car, which was still parked where they'd left it the night before. Jonathan took a deep breath and tried not to show how anxious he felt as Alexia's mother, Isabel, answered the door. And then, in a very shaky voice, Jonathan said hello and asked her if she'd seen or heard from her daughter recently. And when Isabel said she had not, Jonathan completely lost his composure. He said that morning Alexia had gone out for a jog, but not come back, and now he was starting to get really worried. He explained that he'd tried texting Alexia, but she still hadn't answered, and by this point, she should have been home a long time ago, so something was wrong. A moment later, Jonathan saw Stephanie and Gregory coming out of the guest room with very concerned looks on their faces. They joined Jonathan and Isabel at the front door and asked what the commotion was about. And so Jonathan sort of frantically re-explained the situation and asked if either of them had heard from Alexia in the last hour or so. But they shook their heads and said they hadn't. But Stephanie showed Jonathan that she had received a text from Alexia at 9:30 that morning, just to say that she was going out for this jog. But after that, none of them had received any texts or calls from Alexia. Jonathan was crying at this point, and so Alexia's family tried to assure him that, Alexia would probably just show up at the house any minute here, like nothing's going on. I'm sure she's just running late. And Jonathan, he wanted to believe this. But this was completely unusual. Like, this was not normal for Alexia to be gone for this long without being in touch. It just didn't make sense. It was at this point that Jonathan's brother-in-law, Gregory, reached out and put his hand on Jonathan in a sort of comforting way and just said, look, if it makes you feel any better, I'll go back with you and we can literally go look for Alexia together, or at least be together until she comes back. Jonathan didn't really know what to do, but he was very thankful and said, yep, that would be great. And so a couple of minutes later, the two men got in Gregory's SUV and they began driving back towards their house. But Jonathan actually navigated him through the streets along the running route that Alexia usually took to see if maybe they could find her. They drove down all the side streets looking for her, and then when they reached the edge of town, Jonathan and Gregory got out of the car and began checking the paths leading into the countryside, and also the ditches and the banks of the river, but they didn't find Alexia anywhere. And then eventually, they just drove back to Jonathan and Alexia's house to see if maybe she'd finally come home with an explanation for all this, but she had not come home. At this point, Jonathan was completely beside himself, and so Gregory, doing his best to stay calm, said, you know what, let's go to the hospital and see if Alexia had turned up there. A A few minutes later, when they stopped in the parking lot of the local hospital, Jonathan jumped out of the car and ran towards the main entrance, where 2 nurses were taking a cigarette break. Jonathan told these nurses that he was here looking for his wife and that she'd gone on a run 3 hours ago and no one knew where she was now and maybe she's here. So the nurses, who could clearly tell this was an emergency, they put out their cigarettes and went inside to check the register. But a minute later, they came back and told the men that no, Alexia Duvall had not been admitted that morning. She was not here. Before Jonathan or Gregory could protest or ask more questions, the nurses just said, look, you gotta go to the police. Later that afternoon, a police officer named Adeline P.O. sat across from Jonathan in a room at the Gray police station as he explained what had happened with his wife, that she was missing. Jonathan also gave a description of what Alexia had been wearing when she went out running. Bright pink shoes, black leggings, and a red jacket, so pretty easy to spot. And then after describing her and sort of realizing the weight of what he was here for, he just put his head in his hands and continued to weep, as he had been doing much of the morning. Now, P.O. could obviously tell that Jonathan was very upset here, but she had to ask the question that was already forming in her mind. So, as delicately as possible, she asked Jonathan if his wife had any suicidal tendencies, or any reason she might have run off without telling anybody. Jonathan looked up really quickly and just shook his head and said no, and said that overall his wife was very happy, and definitely not suicidal. However, as he sat there thinking about it, he said she had been taking hormones for fertility, and realistically, those hormones appeared to have affected her really badly. For example, sometimes she would lose control of her emotions entirely and even become violent. Or in other instances, he said that she would even have memory lapses, where she wouldn't even know what she was doing when she was doing it. It was like she had become this different person. P.O. nodded and just listened to Jonathan and wrote down everything he was saying. And then when he was done, she followed up and said, can you think of anybody who might have had a problem with Alexia? And for a moment, Jonathan just sat there in silence, kind of mulling over the question. And then suddenly his eyes went wide, like he had just realized something. He told P.O. that they had a neighbor who had been completely obsessed with Alexia earlier that year. He said his name was Arnaud, and he'd been obsessively calling and texting her so many times that Alexia had actually had to block his number, and had actually talked about how she was fearful of going out alone because of this neighbor. But just a couple of months earlier, he had been sent to a psychiatric hospital, and because he was literally removed from the neighborhood, the harassment had stopped. But Jonathan said they were kind of worried that at some point he would come back and then he would be a problem again. And realistically, Jonathan said he could be home now. I just don't know. I don't know where he is. P.O. was obviously very intrigued by this. And so after this interview was over with Jonathan, she and her investigative team began digging into this Arnaud guy to see where he was and what was going on with him. And pretty quickly, they discovered that while Arnaud had gone to that psychiatric hospital, that was true, he was not there anymore. He had been released. And so that night, another officer with the Gray Police knocked on the door of Arnaud's mother's house, where Arnaud was staying, which was about an hour away from Alexia and Jonathan's house. After the officer knocked, a middle-aged woman answered the door. And when the officer asked if she was Arnaud's mother, she said she was. The officer looked past her, and he could see there was this disheveled-looking young man sitting right inside. And he asked the mother if that was Arnaud. And again, the woman said yes. At this point, the officer asked the mother if he could come inside, because he said he needed to speak privately with her son. The mother and Arnaud in the background both seemed very confused by this, but after a minute, they both agreed, and the officer came inside. And so the officer went inside the house and sat down in the living room with Arnaud, while Arnaud's mother went to the kitchen to give the men some privacy. And then once the mother was gone, the officer looked at Arnaud and just said he had some questions about Alexia Duvall. Arnaud immediately looked down at this question, like he was embarrassed and couldn't even look at the officer. But then he looked back up again and told the officer that he had bipolar disorder, and sometimes when he was in a manic state, he acted inappropriately towards women, including Alexia. The officer followed up about all those messages that apparently Arnaud had sent to Alexia that summer, like what was going on with that. And Arnaud admitted that he had done that, but he insisted it really was no big deal. He said that he and Alexia knew each other because they had been neighbors at one point, and they'd also hung out in a group setting once. And so him being in touch with her was not totally weird, like they had a real connection. But Arnaud clarified that when Alexia told him to stop contacting her, he did. And that was the end of it. But this caught the officer's attention, because according to Alexia's husband, Jonathan, the only reason that all the calls and texts had stopped was because Alexia literally had to block Arnaud's phone number. So the officer just cut to the chase here and told Arnaud that Alexia was missing. And then before Arnaud could say anything, the officer asked him where he'd been that morning at 9 a.m. And Arnaud said, I was right here. I was at home with my mom. For a moment, the officer just stared at Arnaud, trying to read his body language to see if maybe he was being deceptive or not. So eventually, the officer just stood up and went into the kitchen where the mother was. And he asked the mother "Where was your son this morning?" And she told the officer with sort of a bewildered look on her face that he was here with me all morning. And so at this point, it was clear to the officer that, if the mother was telling the truth here, it would officially rule out Arnaud as a suspect because, he was here. But the officer also knew that, generally speaking, mothers do not make the best alibis because mothers are known to lie, cheat, steal, and do anything to protect their kids. The following afternoon, on Sunday, October 29th, Chief Officer Frank Paredes glanced out his office window as yet another news van sped past outside down the usually quiet streets of Gray. By now, Alexia's disappearance had blown up into this huge national news story, and this was making it really difficult for Paredes, who was in charge of the investigation. Now, it was still early in the investigation, but already he and his investigators were being hounded by reporters and camera crews at every step. Paredes closed his eyes and tried to focus on what his next step should be. The search effort was well underway. They had called in reinforcements from nearby towns and even organized search teams with volunteers from the public. At that very moment, law enforcement was also using drones and dogs to scour the town and the surrounding woods. Paredes' investigation team had also searched Jonathan and Alexia's home by now, secretly hoping they might find something to pin the disappearance on Jonathan. But there was no blood, no sign of a struggle, and no clues that gave them any direction there. And also, all of Alexia's other family members, her parents, her sister Stephanie, and her brother-in-law Gregory, they could all vouch for each other's whereabouts on the morning of Alexia's disappearance. They claimed they had all been at the house together. And so without any real leads, Paredes had gotten so desperate for any information that he'd literally told his team to set up checkpoints out in the streets and just stop random people and ask them if they had seen or heard anything that could help them find Alexia. And now, as Paredes sat in his office wondering what he was going to do today, he heard a knock at his door. And a moment later, one of his investigators entered with fairly surprising news. The checkpoints actually had turned up something. Paredes listened intently as the investigator explained that a number of people he'd spoken to had mentioned a van. Now, no one had actually seen the van themselves, but they all appeared to have heard the same rumor. That apparently there was a man driving around the area in this white van, and he was known to harass girls and women right out on the street. Now, at first glance, Paredes was worried that perhaps this was just like an unfounded rumor, but then he remembered there were actually two men in Alexia's family who literally drove white vans. Her father, Jean-Pierre, he owned one, and her husband, Jonathan, he drove one for work. On the afternoon of Monday, October 30th, so a little more than 2 days after Alexia went missing, Paredes brought his car to a stop next to a news van parked in the middle of the woods about 4 miles outside of town. Minutes ago, he had received a call from an officer in the field telling him that Alexia's body had been found. And so Paredes had driven out to the scene as fast as he could. But now that Paredes was here at the crime scene, he could tell obviously he was late to the game because, a news crew was already here setting up their cameras near a row of police barriers. And Paredes was disappointed to see this because he'd hoped that if and when her body was discovered, if she was found dead, at that time he would have had at least one suspect or hopefully multiple suspects identified and under surveillance before the word got out to the general public that Alexia was found dead. But now he obviously would not get that chance. Paredes sighed, climbed out of his car, and flashed his badge to an officer who led him around the barriers and into the crime scene. Paredes approached one of the forensics experts who was taking photos and placing yellow numbered markers around on the ground, and Paredes introduced himself as the lead investigator. The expert then led him over to Alexia's body, which was lying on the ground between 2 tree trunks, covered by a white bedsheet. Her pink running shoes were poking out from under the sheet, and Paredes noticed that her feet and the sheet were both partially burned, as if someone had tried to set them on fire at some point. Once the scene had been fully photographed, Paredes bent down and lifted the sheet to get a better look at Alexia's body. She was lying on her back, and there were bruises all over her face, and there were also marks on her neck that looked like they were from strangulation. And right away, Paredes noticed a couple of things that were unusual. First, Alexia's hands were placed neatly in the pockets of her coat, as though her body had been placed there on the ground with a lot of care. Second, despite the beating that Alexia's face had apparently taken, her glasses were placed perfectly on her face. And so to Paredes, it seemed like whoever killed Alexia had felt some sort of remorse afterwards. It was as though the killer had committed this incredibly violent murder, but then had tried to kind of put everything back in order afterward. And this made Paredes think that Alexia's killer was very likely someone who knew Alexia, and not a stranger who simply, accosted her during a jog. Just then, Paredes heard somebody call his name, and he stood up to take a look. Nearby, there was a forensics tech that was waving him over. And so Paredes walked over, and the tech showed Paredes what he had just found. It was a gray plastic cap that looked like it belonged on some kind of spray can. Paredes thought, maybe this could help explain the strange burn marks on the bedsheet and also Alexia's shoes. The killer had probably sprayed something on the body to try and help it catch fire, but it didn't work as well as they thought it would. Just then, another forensics tech called Paredes over to them to show him something else they had found: tire tracks in the dirt. Paredes immediately thought about that tip that he had been given about this van with this person driving around town harassing women and girls, and he wondered if maybe that was true, that this van was involved and that these had been left by the killer when they were transporting Alexia's body. And so as this forensics expert began taking photographs of the tire tracks, Paredes made a mental note to examine the tires of every suspect, family member, and other persons of interest they came across, just in case one of them was a match. And so Paredes was about to turn his attention back to the body when he noticed one more unusual thing out in the woods. There was this young man who did not appear to be a reporter, just kind of wandering around out there in the trees, almost lurking near the crime scene. And so immediately, Paredes went over to this guy and demanded to know what he was doing here. And at this, the man went completely wide-eyed and just started stuttering like he was totally caught off guard. Eventually, the guy managed to mumble that he was just out here picking mushrooms, but Paredes could tell he was obviously lying. That was not why he was out here. And so, operating on sort of a gut instinct, Paredes pulled out his handcuffs and placed the man under arrest. Later that same afternoon, just hours after Alexia's body had been discovered in the woods outside of town, Paredes sat down at a table at the Gray police station across from this suspicious young man he just arrested for lurking near the crime scene for no clear reason. And Paredes was pleased. He'd only been in charge of what was now a murder investigation for a couple of hours, and here he was about to speak to a legitimate suspect, really like the first suspect, who was in custody. But as soon as Paredes actually began speaking to this suspect, he realized that the young man's stutter was not really a sign of him being nervous. He actually had speech issues, and he struggled to speak at all, even when he wasn't nervous. The man was eventually able to explain that his name was Anthony, and he was 29 years old. He said he lived with his parents in Apremont, another small town about 5 miles away, and he admitted that he had lied about being there to pick mushrooms. And so Paredes pressed Anthony to explain then why he was there. And Anthony, he seemed a little embarrassed as he began to explain, but what he said was, he didn't know Alexia personally. He had just heard about her disappearance in the news, and he wanted to help with the search effort. But Anthony said he couldn't read or write, so he had not been able to fill out the paperwork to join the official search party. So instead, he'd just driven out to the woods in his own car to look for Alexia himself. But while he was out there, the police showed up, and clearly there was something going on, and when Paredes walked over to him, Anthony said he got scared and just lied and said, "Oh, I'm out here picking mushrooms." Like he said it was just embarrassment. And as Paredes sat there listening to the story, he wasn't quite sure what to make of it, or really what to make of Anthony. Anthony's demeanor seemed almost childlike, but his behavior was not childlike. It was very adult-like and pretty suspicious. So Paredes followed up by asking him what he was doing on the morning of October 28th, which was the morning Alexia went missing. Anthony said he'd woken up at his parents' house and had breakfast with them before he went out with his girlfriend and also another friend. And he gave Paredes their names and also their phone numbers so they could confirm it. So Paredes stepped out of the room, and he did exactly that. He called the various phone numbers and spoke to the people in Anthony's life, and they all corroborated his alibi. So despite how suspicious Anthony had been acting, Paredes had no choice but to let Anthony go. A week later, on November 5th, a march was organized in Alexia's honor. 10,000 people turned out to show their support for Alexia's family and also to protest violence against women. And hidden among this huge crowd was a pair of police officers who'd been assigned to follow Alexia's husband, Jonathan Duvall. At this point, Jonathan really was looking like the most obvious suspect, since he was the husband and also the last person to see Alexia alive. So the police had tapped his phone and put him under surveillance. But all they had learned so far from the phone taps was that Jonathan made frequent calls to Alexia's family, to his own siblings and his friends, to talk about how much he missed his wife. And the officers who were literally following Jonathan around found that he really rarely left his house except to visit Alexia's parents, which he did almost every day. But so far, it was like none of Jonathan's behavior actually seemed really suspicious at all. And now, at this big march, the investigators stood in the crowd and watched as Jonathan hobbled his way up the steps to the podium, followed by Alexia's mother and father. And in fact, Jonathan was trembling so much by the time he got up there that Alexia's parents had to physically prop him up before he could begin reading his speech to the crowd. And so at this point, the investigators just kind of exchanged a glance. Either they were wasting their time following an obviously grieving husband with nothing to hide, or Jonathan was like a world-class actor giving the performance of a lifetime. But the investigators knew that until new evidence presented itself, there was really nothing they could do but, watch and wait, which included watching Jonathan and just seeing what he did. They were also still waiting on the tire analysis from the crime scene, but they didn't expect much to come from it. At this point, the creepy white van story seemed to be more like an urban legend in this town. And so, as the weeks turned to months and still there was no progress on this case, the investigators, including Paredes, began to wonder if this case would ever be solved.
So the video that I'm about to show you is 10 years old and it was recorded by two best friends. Basically, they were home alone and bored and they decided to record a video where they're like picking up stuff, but almost like if they were doing it with their minds. But instead, what they did was reverse the video so it looked like they were doing it. Again, it was just them two at home. One friend was recording, one friend was acting, and then they saw something else and had no idea how they hadn't seen that before. But there shouldn't be anybody behind the friend who was in the video. Check this out. Who the fuck was that? What was that? So the next picture that I'm about to show you, this girl says that her aunt was leaving her house and she snapped a picture. Nobody should be inside her house. However, you see something by the front door and unfortunately you can kind of see when the dog is also looking at it. So this is the picture in question. Her aunt was taking this picture, but look at the dog and look at the entrance of the house. And of course, I'm giving you a closer look. The fuck? It almost looks like the ring where the hair's in the front, or I don't know. What do you guys see? The poor dog though. Like, what the fuck is that? The next picture is a little crazy because it was three friends who went to the river at night and they can't find any logic to this picture. Basically, they said that the friend taking a picture swore that he saw a person turn and look at him and then keep walking. But then when he took the picture, this is what appeared. I also hate the fact that it kind of looks like a body and then a round head. But he swore he saw a person like walk in front of him, and then this is what he took a picture of when it should have been the person that he saw. And of course in the background you see the friends. Let me know what you guys think.
Do you guys believe that aliens are real? Do you guys believe in aliens, UFOs, and all that stuff? My friend told me about 2 separate alien encounters that happened out in Florida. I am back with another spooky story. So this story happened in Polk County, Florida. So we're gonna call my friend Dude. So basically Dude was getting locked up and basically they all got out of the van, right? Dude is actually here right now. So I was telling the alien story from Polk County.
Oh man.
You wanna tell it yourself?
No, you got it.
Okay. He stepped out of the van. It's like everything just stopped, right? Like the CEOs and everyone around him just like stood still. And mind you, everybody stopped. Like for some reason, like it seemed like everybody just stopped moving and he's the only one who's like still moving around. So he's moving around, noticing that everybody's stuck and something just told him to look up. So he does, and y'all, he's seeing 4 different colored lights. He describes it as like the rainbow. So he actually describes what he's seeing to like a specific game that we used to play when we were children. And it's basically like a toy that has like different lights, like the red, the green, the yellow. And when you press the lights, like it makes a noise. Like he said it looked exactly like that in the sky. But it was also like in a diamond formation. Object zooms up and it made like a weird sound, and he describes it as a sound from Jumanji before like they drop from the sky. That sound, that's what it sounded like to him. Mind you, as he's standing there staring at this, the thing does another zoop across the sky before it disappears. And it was like he was like this weird trance, right? So like as the object disappeared into the sky, he just kind of comes back to reality and notices that everybody else is like starting to move again and they're moving like nothing happened. So then he comes back to reality and he looks over at his bro and he's like, yo, like what just happened? Mind you, this is the same bro that he said he had an alien encounter with prior. That's another story time for another day. But homeboy, at that moment, he didn't see anything. Nobody else saw anything except for him. It seemed like everybody was just like caught in like a weird trance. Like they all literally froze. And yeah, that's pretty much the story. You ever had a weird encounter? If so, feel free to DM it to me right here on TikTok or on Instagram. And if you guys are curious about what's on my face, y'all, Works is having like a major sale on TikTok shop. If you're interested in these products, these ones are specifically for brightening your face. Go ahead and click the orange link from your favorite Haitian homegirl.
Living next to the woods can be creepy. It's not for everyone. because you will see things, you will hear things. It can get very weird. And there is a particular set of rules that if you find yourself living next to the woods or the forest, that you should follow. Now, the first rule is at nighttime, always lock your doors, always close your curtains. Also, at nighttime, never look out the window facing the woods. If you hear a knock at your door at nighttime, do not answer it, especially if it is your back door. You will see lights coming from the woods. Do not follow them. Do not try and communicate with them. Just ignore them. And the most important thing you must remember is that anything you see outside, most likely it's not real. You are not seeing it, or you are not hearing it. Now, this story comes out of Tennessee. There's this man named Christian. Christian said that at one point in time, he grew up in this farmhouse that was out in the boonies. And he said they lived deep, deep in the woods, and it was a dirt road that took several miles to get to their house. And they literally had no neighbors around. Well, he said when they first moved in, there was a lot of weird stuff that would happen. For instance, the dogs didn't want to go anywhere near the woods. They would get to the tree line, and they would turn around. And it was like they were afraid of something. They also noticed these deer. They would come into their yard at night, and they would just be staring out into the woods like they were scared of something. And then one night, something very strange happened. So it was about 11 o'clock at night. And on the back door, they hear boom, 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 a knock. And that's when his father goes to the back door and he opens it up. There was no one out there. He said as he looked out into the woods, he started to hear screams. And it sounded like someone was in trouble. So he said he got up, and him and his father went outside and they started looking around. They couldn't see anybody. So eventually they called the police, and the police came out and they searched the area. They couldn't find anyone. Well, on a regular basis, they started hearing screams outside their house coming from the woods, and every night something would be knocking on their back door. A few times they found the back door wide open. The other weird thing that started happening is Christian's brother started having these weird nightmares. And not only was he having nightmares, he started to sleepwalk. And he would get up from his bed, he'd walk down the hallway into the kitchen and out the back door. And right before he would get into the woods, his dad or his mom would stop him and wake him up. And, this happened several times. Well, eventually his father put up like a camera outside because he was trying to figure out who's knocking on the back door. And one day he looks at the video and he sees his son going out the back door. And he notices he just starts looking around like he's looking for something out in the woods, like something was calling him. And finally, his father comes running out and stops him. So the father started to get really creeped out. He told Christian and his brothers and sisters, do not go out in the woods. And he said that's when one night there was a very loud banging sound coming from the back door. And it was almost like someone was trying to get in this door. So he said his father grabs a baseball bat. He goes to the back door and he opens it. And he looks around, and out of the corner of his eyes, he sees something moving in the woods. So he said his father started to make his way towards the wood line. And that's when he sees something run back further into the woods. So his father starts to go into the woods down this trail. And he said he could see this thing from a distance. And he noticed when he would kind of move, it would move. Or when he would turn to the right, it would turn to the right. Or when he would turn to the left, he would turn to the left. And he said whatever he would do, whatever movement he would do, this thing would follow. And he said that's when he realized whatever this was, it was almost like looking at a mirror. This thing was copying him. It was following his every movement. So his father turns around, takes off running through the woods, gets back in the house, and tells everyone, get in the vehicle, we are leaving. And they moved that night and left everything behind in the house. And he said still to this day, he has nightmares whenever he's near the woods because he still thinks about his time living in that place. Now, Central Illinois is considered home to a lot of creepy and weird things. I consider it to be one of the most haunted places in the United States. Now, the Peoria area is sort of a hotspot for activity. Grandview Drive in Peoria Heights is considered to be one of the most beautiful drives in America, but it's also the most haunted. Now, the earliest ghost reports go back to 1907, when it was reported in the newspaper that on a nightly basis, people riding in their horse and carriages were being chased by a specter. The reports continue much after this, though, that there is a ghost who's seen on Grandview Drive that chases cars. There are reports of these lights, these orbs that are seen on the hillside, and when people approach them, they seem to move or disappear. There are phantom joggers, phantom cars. There is an old legend at the end of Grandview Drive that when you drive up the hill at night, you might see a man standing in the middle of the road. There are people who said they've heard Indian chants coming from the woods or disembodied voices. Now, the oldest legend of this area is that of the Peoria Heights Water Tower, which is on the beginning of the Grandview Drive. Now, it's this tall red water tower with an observation deck on top that you can actually go and look and see views of the Illinois River. But the story goes in the 1970s, supposedly there was this high school girl who was distraught after her boyfriend broke up with her on prom night. So she went to the tower and went to the top and jumped off the side. It's said that when she fell to the ground, her blood spattered on the side of this tower. And despite efforts trying to clean this, they could not get the blood stain off, so they painted the tower red. Now, there's no documentation to actually prove this story, but still, there are people who report seeing the ghost of a young girl. In fact, I talked to someone who worked at the tower, and they said at night they would have to go up to the observation deck and make sure that it was completely clear. Well, when they go to the top observation deck, they see a woman standing by the ledge. And when they go to tell her it's closing time, she simply vanishes. So after that night, she did not want to go up there at night alone. There are people in the area who've reported they were sitting in the bench and they seen a woman walk by and sort of vanish right in front of their eyes. It's also reported along Grandview Drive of a ghost ship that is believed to be the steamboat, the Columbia, that had crashed on the Illinois River and rivaled the Titanic in people that had passed away. Now, not too far from Grandview Drive, along Prospect, you will find the downtown Peoria Heights area, which there are a lot of businesses located in very old buildings. One specifically is that of Sullivan's, which is considered by a lot of previous workers to be very haunted. Everything from bottles falling off shelves, to seeing people out of the corner of their eyes, to workers being afraid to go down in the basement. It's definitely believed that this place was possibly built on an old Indian burial ground. Now, we also are home to one of the oldest historical cemeteries in the area, known as the Springdale Cemetery. A lot of Peoria's past residents are buried here, and it's said that they still return to view the beautiful city that they loved. One of the more seen ghosts in this cemetery is that of the White Lady, who is often seen near the creek and pavilion, bent over a tombstone crying, and when people approach her to see if she's all right, she turns around and is often seen without a face. She's also said to be seen running along the hills and the rows of tombstones, gallantly strolling through the cemetery. There have been several reports of people seeing dogs that they follow into an area that is the old pet cemetery. There are reports of this black car that's seen late at night driving around when the cemetery gates were locked, and this is known as the Phantom Car. There is a mausoleum that a lot of kids believed if you went there at midnight and you knocked on it, something would not knock back. There are also reports of a pond that is seen in the middle of the cemetery, except no pond exists. However, in the 1930s and 1940s, there was a pond in this exact location, but people have reported swimming in this pond and fishing and, having leisurely activities at night, only to discover there was no pond in the cemetery. But probably the scariest of all the ghosts in Springdale Cemetery is that of the caretaker's ghost, which is said to be seen in the back of the cemetery and chase young teenagers attempting to visit the cemetery at night. Some of the other haunted locations in Peoria are that of Emack and Bolios, which is downtown. Apparently the old owner, who had fell down the stairs one day and passed away, is seen in and around this building and often seen late at night. There is another legend known as California Road in Pekin, and many stories and legends have spawned out of this area, but supposedly if you're driving down this road at night, you will see a young woman walking on the road. If you give her a ride, she will vanish, or sometimes she vanishes right in front of your own eyes. The other areas in Peoria that tend to be most haunted is there is an old cabin that is said to be by the river, and a lot of teenagers would sneak there at night and go along these trails. And it is documented that someone had taken their life there and was found by some young teenagers. But people say when you go there, still to this day, you can hear screams, knocking sounds, and people have even been reported being chased by a guy out of the cabin. Now, the Bartonville Insane Asylum, which at one time was this huge facility along Pfeiffer Road. Well, the oldest story is that of a bookbinder who was actually a patient at the Bartonville Insane Asylum, and he was given the responsibility of burying the patients who had passed away. And it said on his funeral, there were all of these people in attendance, and they had witnessed him standing next to a tree, crying as he often did when he would bury the other patients. And even Dr. Zeller himself wrote that he witnessed this along with hundreds of other people. And still to this day, people say you can see the ghost of old bookbinder hanging out near the elm tree next to where he's buried. There are many stories that come out of the old insane asylum itself, where people would say they would see nurses walking the hallways. They would hear screams. There was a teddy bear supposedly on the 4th or 5th floor that would move by itself, that no one knew where it came from. But definitely going there at night, you would get a feeling of dread or a sensation that you were being watched. Peoria is also home to many UFO sightings, especially along Grandview Drive and the Illinois River. Most famously, there was a young son and his dad who were driving in their truck one night, just a little bit outside of Peoria, when they seen this bright light in the sky, and they noticed it was following their truck. Well, the next thing they knew, they were near the Quad Cities, and they were going in the wrong direction, and they had no idea how they had got to this point in time. And it was one of the well-known documented reports of alien abduction back in the 1980s. So what do you think? Do you have a ghost story about Central Illinois that you'd like to tell?
Might have known the story of real-life boogeyman.
You have to understand that when you go into the Appalachian Mountains, you are entering into another realm. And there is a set of unspoken rules that you must follow. Rule number 1, if you hear something calling your name, right, you didn't. There is nothing there. And you should not respond. Do not say hello. Do not say, who is it? Just run away. Because something is trying to gain permission. And by you acknowledging it, you are allowing it to come after you. If you hear screams in the mountains, right, you didn't. And do not go towards the direction of the screams to try and help. Because once again, something is trying to lure you. If you see people, you don't. If you hear crying, you're not hearing it. Do not respond to this at all, because you are giving permission to whatever is in those woods to come after you. Now, if you are to go camping in the Appalachian Mountains, right, you have to remember, at night, you must keep a fire going at all times. And it's not for warmth, it's not for cooking, it's to keep you safe. And if you are going to camp in a tent, make sure when you go into that tent, it is sealed up. There are no holes, there are no cracks. And if you hear any kind of screaming, yelling, or anyone calling your name, do not respond. Do not go to sleep. And if something wakes you up, stay alert, and once again, do not respond. Now, it's very important when you are walking through the Appalachian Mountains, if you come across a deer carcass, do not touch it, do not stare at it, walk away, ignore it, because this is something, once again, trying to lure you into the woods. Now, if it comes to the point that something is chasing you, and it gets you, and there is no escape, fight as hard as you can, whether it's a person, an animal. If it's something else, though, and you know what I'm talking about, well, you just let it get you, right? Because at that point, there's nothing you can do. And there's an old saying, you go into the Appalachian Mountains with 2 bullets, right? You fire the first one at something that isn't a person, that isn't an animal, and if it doesn't run away, you know what to do with the second one.
I don't think I should have answered the phone that night. It was late, I was already in bed that night, and my phone started to ring. It was an unknown phone number, so I'm not sure why, but I picked it up. So I didn't say anything at first, I just kind of heard breathing, and it wasn't normal breathing, it was breathing like somebody was trying to stay quiet. So eventually I hung up. I just kind of figured it was somebody who dialed the wrong phone number. And then a couple seconds later, they actually rang my phone again, same phone number. So this time I picked up and I said hello, and they said my name, and it wasn't loud, it was more of a whisper. I immediately hung up and I locked my phone, and I'm starting to freak out a little bit, but kind of just telling myself that somebody's pranking me. A few seconds later, my phone lit up again, and this time it said that I had a voicemail. So I opened it and I listened, and it was a recording of me. You could hear my breathing, you could hear my blankets shuffling around, and you could hear me say hello in the voicemail. I literally stopped moving the second that I heard it, because at the very end of the recording, you can hear somebody else breathing, and it's not me this time, but it sounds like it's right next to me. I checked the entire room and nobody was in there. I haven't answered a phone call from an unknown number since, but the part that's still bothering me is the voicemail is still in my phone. Even after me going in and deleting it, I never saved this voicemail, but it is permanently on my phone.
Get ready with me while I tell you this ghost story. So for a little background, this happened in the house that I still live in to this day. Nothing about the house itself ever seemed off. It's just a small one-story home, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, very normal. That's how it always starts. The house is always calm, it's always normal, nothing's ever happened there before. But my dad's side of the family have always had experiences. A lot of them were involved in things like witchcraft, or at least were around it. But I never really thought anything like that would happen to me until it did. I was 11 years old and I was getting ready for school one morning. It was early, around 7 a.m. My mom had just woken up and told me to start getting ready while she went to take a shower. My dad was still asleep in their room. He had been home a lot back then because of an accident, and my older brother was still asleep too. I remember going into my parents' bedroom because I wanted to grab a specific pair of jeans. Everything about that morning felt normal at first, but the second I stepped into the room, I felt it. The feeling that someone was watching me. The feeling that you know you're not alone. I brushed it off at first and assumed it was my dad, but when I looked over, he was completely passed out, so I just kept looking for my jeans. I was standing in front of my mom's dresser, her vanity with the mirror right in front of me, and for some reason, I felt the need to look up, so I did. And I wish I hadn't. All of this before school? Oh my God. In the mirror, I saw something standing in the doorway behind me. A man. Tall. Too tall. He was leaning slightly into the room, one hand gripped on the door frame like he was holding himself there. Just watching. His head was moving slowly from side to side, like he was shifting his focus from me to my dad. Ew. And the worst part was that he didn't have a face. No eyes, no mouth, nothing. Just blank. But somehow I could still feel that he was looking directly at me. I hate this. His fingers were long, unnaturally long, and they stood out against the white door frame in a way that made my stomach turn. I froze. I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe, and then his head turned back toward me. And the second it did, he was gone. Just gone like he had never been there at all. I immediately spun around, expecting to see someone standing in the doorway, but there was nothing. And I remember being too scared to even walk towards it. Because in my mind, what if he came back? What if I had to pass him to get out? Eventually, I forced myself to move. I walked to the doorway slowly, and there was nothing there. I checked my brother's room. The door was closed. He was still asleep. The house was exactly how it should have been. But I know what I saw, and I didn't tell anyone because I thought no one would believe me. So I just kept it to myself for years until one day I finally told my dad. And the second I finished telling him, his face changed, like real fear. I asked him what was wrong, and he told me something I'll never forget. He said that when he was around my age, he saw the same thing. The exact same thing. A tall figure peeking around corners. Why does the word peeking really freak me out? Peeking, ugh, it makes it, just the word makes it so much worse. peeking around corners, watching, always watching. But he said that it didn't start that way. At first, it was something small, a little dog. It would show up around the house, running under tables, hiding in corners, harmless, almost normal, so they didn't think anything of it. Until one day the dog was gone, and in its place was the man. Oh, the same tall, faceless figure. And he didn't act like a dog. He didn't move around playfully. He would just stand there, peeking around corners, watching them while they ate, while they watched TV, while they lived their normal lives, always just out of reach. And even though he had no face, they all knew he was looking directly at them. I really don't like this. Imagine just living with something tall and ominous, and like you always just see it right out of the corner of your eye. Oh, that would, number one, it would drive me completely nuts. Never being able to get like a good look at this thing, but just knowing that it's always there, that would quite literally drive me crazy. After my dad told me that, everything clicked into place, because whatever I saw that morning wasn't new. It had been there long before me, and maybe it never left, because after that, things started happening more often. Door handles would jiggle when I was alone. I'd hear knocking on my door when no one was there, footsteps when the house was completely empty, and sometimes I still feel it, like something is just around the corner, waiting, watching, trying to get my attention. And now I can't help but wonder if it's the same thing. The man that peeks.
Yeah, I'm back with another scary story time from my mom. And this is when she was living in the Bronx. No, she is not from the Bronx. She is from Spanish Harlem, but I don't recall what age she was at this time. Just know she was really, really freaking young. And as some of y'all may know, my mom was always on punishment. She never understood why she was on punishment, because it would be like little things that any kid does that she would get disciplined for. So this particular night, she was in her room, supposed to be asleep, but she wasn't asleep. And she was in the dark, you know, no TV, no phone. She didn't really have that much technology at that time. She was just sitting on the bed with the door closed. So like I said, it's pitch black in this room that she's in. She has a little rosary necklace, you know, the little necklace with the cross on it. And she's throwing it like she's fishing, right? And she throws it a few times, maybe 4 or 5 times. And when she throws it again, something yanks it, like they were holding on to it. And the rosary necklace that she had was one that you can like snap open and snap it back together. When she threw it, and whatever it was in the dark grabbed it, it broke, right? So she got scared, and I'm honestly getting scared telling this story my dang self. But she got scared, and she like grabbed it back, and she seen it was like, you know, snapped open. So she snapped it right back together, and then she ran underneath the covers, and she was just praying to God, like, God, there's a monster in the room. Can you please get him out? You know, talking to him how any other child would talk to God. She eventually, I think she cried herself to sleep. That story is so freaking spooky to me. As y'all may know, my mom has so many spooky story times on my page, and she might have some on her page too. But definitely follow me if you want more spooky, scary stories.
What happened to this girl is in my top 3 worst fears ever, and I'm not even exaggerating. Angela Hammond was 20 years old, engaged to the guy she'd grown up with, living in a small, quiet town in Missouri where nothing really ever happened. And on the night of April 4th, 1991, nothing was supposed to happen. Until it did. So earlier in the evening, Angela and Rob, her fiance, had spent some time at a cookout with a few friends. Nothing unusual, just a normal Friday night out, and when it was over, she dropped him off at his house at around 10 o'clock, told him that she would call him in a couple of hours, and she headed back out. I'm not too sure where she headed, maybe to hang out with the girls again, who knows. But an hour later, just like she promised, Angie called him from a payphone in the middle of town. Now, standing outside in the middle of the night is basically asking for danger in today's time. But that wasn't the case for Angela's world. She lived in a small, quiet town where everybody knew everybody, and the worst thing that could happen to you was accidentally dating your third cousin. So she stood there at that payphone, laughing, talking to her fiance, just enjoying the last bit of her night before she had to go home. But then she said something. There's a truck that keeps circling the block. It's like an older model Ford, and it's green. I'm not worried or anything. I just don't know what they're doing. And for a minute, it really does seem like nothing. Just a truck on a quiet street. Rob isn't worried. Angie isn't worried. So they just keep talking. But then the truck slows down right in front of her. It pulls over and it parks next to the phone booth, and the door opens. The man who steps out is this big bearded guy with glasses, overalls, and he walks straight over to the bank of payphones right beside Angela and picks one up. And Angela, still on the phone with Rob, is watching him out of the corner of her eye, describing everything in real time. Her voice is calm, almost casual, and then she notices the flashlight. He pulled out a flashlight and he's looking at something in the dark, something she can't quite make out. So Rob tells her, just ask the guy if he needs to use the phone. Maybe the one that he picked was broken. So she does. She leans over and asks the man if he needs to use the phone. But the man just looks at her and says, no, it's okay. I'll just try again in a minute. And so Angela turns back to Rob, but the man is still there, still not using any of the phones, just standing there. But she minds her own business and she keeps talking to him. She's telling Rob about how much, and then a scream tears through the phone. The most harrowing sound Rob has ever heard. And before he could even get her name out, before he could ask if she's okay, the line goes dead. Before Rob could even consciously decide to move, his body is running straight out the front door. He's in his car. He's absolutely flooring it towards that payphone as fast as he could go. And he's probably thinking, 7 blocks, that's it. She's 7 blocks away. I know exactly where she is. I will find you, Angela. And then all of a sudden, a pickup truck comes blasting past him in the other direction, going way too fast. And before Rob could even fully process what he's looking at, somebody inside that truck leans out the window and screams his name. Robbie! And so he knows before the word even finishes leaving her mouth. That's Angela. Rob desperately throws the car into reverse. He spins around and he goes. He gets the truck back into his sights. He's chasing it through the streets of Clinton. He can see the brake lights. He is right there. He is 2 miles behind it. He has it. He is not letting this go. And then he feels it. The car losing power underneath him, because that reverse, that hard, panicked, everything on the line reverse, it damaged the transmission. And now it's dying. He can feel his car slowing down as he hopelessly stares at the pickup truck speeding up. And within a matter of seconds, the truck pulls off the road into the dark, and all Rob can see is the dust cloud it left behind. He sat there in this car for God knows how long, staring at the dark, blaming himself. Why did you give out? I was right there. I was right behind him. She was right there. 2 miles. He had the guy for 2 miles, and then his car died, the man disappeared, and Angela was gone. Wow, that was heavy. Okay. When word gets out that Angela Hammond had been taken, the entire town turned itself inside out. Police, civilians, search parties combing every road on foot and from air. Investigators are running every registered vehicle, matching the description of what Rob reported. Late 60s, 2-toned Ford pickup, and they came up with 1,600 possibilities. 1,600 trucks that get checked one by one, and not a single one matches. And so at a certain point, when the search starts coming up cold, and the only person who could actually place that truck at the scene is Rob himself, the investigation turns in a direction that Rob probably saw coming, because, it always does. People start wondering if maybe the fiance had something to do with it. So the police department start looking closely at Rob's story, and within a week, they clear him completely. Angela's mother, Marcia Cook, said that she never once doubted him for a second. I mean, she'd known the kid his entire life, but Rob still carries it with him anyways, because the thing he can't shake isn't whether people blame him, it's that he was 2 miles behind that truck. He was almost there. He almost reached her. And then he wasn't. As of right now, no truck was ever found. No suspect has been publicly named, and Rob Schaefer grows up and keeps living in a world where he still doesn't know what happened to the woman that he loved at 20 years old. I truly hope that one day her family can get some answers. That is all for today. Please be cautious, be aware of your surroundings, carry protection. I love you guys. Mwah. Group hug.
But sometimes a grieving widow is not a grieving widow. I have another full day of pre-recording today. You guys already know. I'm still stuck on this flavor. It's just so good. In March of 2023, a Utah mother named Corey Richens self-published a children's book. It was called Are You With Me? And it followed a young boy dealing with the loss of his father, exploring the emotions of grief and the idea that those that we loved are somehow always with us. Corey told every single person around her, every single person in her life, that the reasons for her writing that book was to help her own kids coping with the loss of their own father. Months later, Corey Richards was arrested and charged with the death of her husband. Corey and Eric Richens first crossed paths in 2009 in Utah when Corey was only 19 years old. Eric was 27. Described by those who knew him as a hardworking man from a ranching family. He was the oldest of 3 siblings. He had 2 little sisters, and he very much so gave off older brother in the sense that he was always the first person to be there when someone needed help for anything. He was also protective and quite literally would put the people that he loved and cared for above anything else. When the two of them met, Eric was doing just fine. Don't get me wrong, he had experienced his fair share of loss and heartbreak by that point in his life. He had been married once before but was now single, yet love life aside, he had done pretty well for himself. He had his own stone masonry company, one that he owned with one of his friends, which is like a construction business that specializes in building and installing structures made from stone, brick, concrete blocks, or things like that. And apart from that, his family had always been well off. The name Richens in Utah was a pretty well-respected name in their town. All that to say, he was doing pretty well for himself. So when he met Corey, he saw her as someone that he could really see himself building a life with. She was funny, she was beautiful, she was smart, she was everything, and the two of them quickly fell in love. Eric found in Corey someone that seemed to match his energy, and on June 15th of 2013, the two made it official. They married and they signed a prenup agreement on the same day. That prenup would later become one of the most significant, important pieces of evidence in trial. It was a pretty standard prenup, it sounds like, basically stating that in the case of a divorce, what was Corey's as far as assets and cash would stay Corey's. Vice versa, what was Eric's as far as assets and cash would stay his. So they would not get anything from each other. However, if one of them passed away, that was a different story, because the one left would get the assets and the cash from the other. Everything would be left to the surviving partner. But they didn't have to worry about that because neither of those things would happen. Together, they built what looked like from the outside a picture-perfect life. They settled in a small town in Utah, a mountain town southeast of Salt Lake City, and had 3 sons. Corey was a boy mom and she loved it. Eric ran his successful masonry business. Corey launched herself into real estate. She was buying cheap houses, flipping them, and selling them for a lot more money, and she was doing very well for herself. To friends, neighbors, and families on both sides, they appeared to have it all. The marriage, the house, the good careers, and the cutest children. Their life was a dream come true. But as we know, not everything is what it seems to be, because beneath the surface, cracks in Corey and Eric's marriage were beginning to show. The red flag started when Eric confided in one of his sisters, letting her know that he had reason to believe that Corey was hiding something. Or at the very least, that she was doing something behind his back, specifically when it came to their finances. And he kind of was getting the vibe that she was keeping certain things from him on purpose, which obviously he was not happy about. The trust between the two of them kind of reached this weird gray area, but remember I told you that something about Eric was that he was always going to put the people that mattered the most to him in his life first. Those people to Eric were his children. He wanted and needed to know that no matter what happened, if things did go south in his marriage, his children would be taken care of. And in 2020, Eric made the decision to change his trust. Eric, thinking that he would rather be safe than sorry, quietly consulted with both a divorce attorney and an estate planning attorney to help him out. And what he did was change his trust. He removed Corey as the beneficiary of his $500,000 life insurance policy and designated the trust instead. Eric also made sure that in the event of his passing, everything would go to his 3 boys, managed by his sister
Katie, not Corey, again with the intention of being able to protect his sons long term should anything happen. Shortly before the tragic events of today's case, Eric and Corey had been in the middle of a days-long, maybe weeks-long argument. That argument over this mansion monster house was one of the clearest windows into just how broken the Richens marriage had become in its final months and how differently Eric and Corey saw their futures together. That property was not just any house, it was a 22,000 square foot unfinished mansion sitting on nearly 10 acres of land in Heber City, Utah, a stunning stretch of mountain real estate not far from Park City Ski Resort. That estate had originally been built in 2017, but it was never completed. It was abandoned mid-construction and it had been sitting there like a skeleton of someone else's dream. But when Corey discovered it in 2019, she saw a vision. 8 bedrooms, 12 bathrooms, a swimming pool, a golf simulator, a rock climbing wall, a basketball court, a home theater, and a separate $4,000 square foot guest house. She saw just how much potential a house of that size had, and she decided that she wanted to make an offer with a group of investors and begin working toward a purchase that would cost nearly $2 million. An accountant reportedly told Corey and Eric that if she were to complete the project and stay on budget, they could, if all went well, they could potentially walk away with a $12 million profit. For Corey, this was the deal that was going to change everything. This was the one. However, Eric, he did not see it that way. Paying bills worth of millions of dollars to put into a house that he wasn't sure of to begin with, it was not a great idea in his eyes at all. He just thought the risk was too high for the unknown, because who's to say that the construction would all go according to plan? Who's to say that they would stay within budget? And who's to say that they then would be able to sell it for as much as Corey wanted to sell it for? No one could say for sure, and he was not ready to risk it. And according to Eric's family, he wasn't just hesitant, it wasn't even an option in his head. He had made up his mind, and his family members claimed that he had planned to tell Corey that they were not going to be buying the mansion at all. Not only that, but he was also planning on telling Corey that she was being cut out of his will that very same day, and he made the decision to cut her out of his inheritance because she was doing fishy stuff behind the scenes. For example, she had tried to switch out their life insurance policy to make herself the only beneficiary without telling Eric. He found out, and then he changed it back. So her behavior was shady, and Eric was not having it. He was still secretly meeting up with that divorce attorney, trying to weigh out his different options while keeping it hush-hush because he didn't want his sons to think that anything was wrong. March 4th of 2022 was a Friday, and that day was the day that Eric Richens was found deceased inside of his own home. On the evening of March 3rd, the night prior, Corey Richens made her husband a beverage. She told investigators that she made it and served it to him because they were celebrating a recent real estate closing. Eric took the glass, he drank it, and according to Corey's account to police, he complained of chest pain before he eventually just headed off to bed and went to sleep. She told investigators that she went to sleep in one of her children's rooms because he was having a nightmare, and woke up around 3 a.m. to eventually go back to her and Eric's bedroom. It was then that she found Eric cold to the touch at the foot of their bed, lying on the floor. She called 911. Corey Richens placed the call to 911 dispatchers at 3:21 in the morning on March 4th, 2022. However, prosecutors would later allege something significant. According to their argument, cell phone data showed that Corey first accessed her phone at 3:06 a.m. but did not dial 911 until 3:21 a.m. That's a 15-minute gap that the prosecution would argue reflected a guilty conscience. On the call itself, Corey can be heard saying, quote, "I just came into bed in our bed and I turned over and he's just cold. He's just so cold," end quote. She told the dispatcher she did not know what happened. When the dispatcher then tried to instruct her to perform CPR, Corey gave excuses as to why she couldn't, at one point saying, quote, "I can't move it. It's just dead weight," and asking, quote, "I'm sorry, can you please send somebody," end quote. Officers arrived at the scene and it was too late. Eric Richens was gone. He was only 39 years old. Now to backtrack, the story that Corey told authorities on the scene was that her and her husband had been celebrating closing on that $2 million home, right? The following morning, the day after her husband's body was found, Corey signed papers to finalize the purchase of the $2 million mansion for her real estate business. Imagine the shock that investigators felt when they realized that Eric Richens had absolutely no intentions of closing on that home, and quite literally the opposite. He was getting ready to tell Corey that they were not going to be closing on the sale of the house. Add to that all of the other weird, suspicious things that they were starting to discover little by little. It was all painting a very, very dark picture. And the more they found out, the worse things started to look for Corey Richens. Eric's autopsy revealed that he had passed away from intoxication. The level in his system was 5 times the lethal dose. The medical examiner confirmed 2 critical details: that was illicit, meaning that it was not medical grade or prescribed and that it had been ingested orally. There was no sign of a heart disease, a stroke, or any other natural cause of death. Because of that, the manner of death was ruled a homicide, but despite the autopsy results pointing to clearly someone having done this on purpose, Corey was not immediately arrested. Investigators would spend the next year building the case because they had to make sure that they were correct in what they were starting to believe happened. During that time, Corey continued to live her life publicly. Like I said, she signed papers to close on that mansion, but then she ended up putting it back on the market 2 weeks later. And then in March of 2023, she announced that she was self-publishing the grief book, Are You With Me? Corey Richens appeared on Good Things Utah in April of 2023 to promote her new book, sitting across from the television host describing her husband's passing as unexpected and difficult, and she talked about healing. But as she was busy appearing on TV, investigators were digging into her and Eric's marriage, and they were finding a lot of valuable, scary information, to say the least. Investigators learned specifically about this one incident that happened in Greece years prior, the same way that they learned about nearly everything else that was suspicious in this case from Eric's own family after he was already gone. When detectives began speaking to Eric's family members, they were told that Eric had believed that his wife had attempted to get rid of him during a trip in Greece several years earlier by serving him a beverage that made him incredibly sick. Imagine that. When that happened, Eric told his sisters about it and said that he thought that Corey wanted him out of the picture. And then the family told investigators that Eric had warned them repeatedly while he was alive that if anything happened to him, his wife Corey would be the person to blame. That Greece story was just one piece of a larger picture that his family painted for detectives, because they also found out that in 2019, Corey took out a $250,000 home equity line of credit against the family home, which was Eric's premarital property, without his knowledge or permission. She had also been withdrawing money from his business accounts and charging his credit cards. When Eric discovered this in September of 2020, he confronted her. She promised to pay it back, but by that point, she had already charged more than $30,000 on his credit and withdrawn at least $100,000 from his accounts. That was around the time that Eric had first reached out to that divorce lawyer. They also found out that Corey had changed the life insurance policy for herself to be the only beneficiary, but then Eric changed it back. But then I think Corey changed it back again, because at the time of his passing, it sounds like Corey was under the impression that she was the only person listed as the beneficiary. She had no idea about Eric's sister's name being on anything, and it's believed that she truly really believed that she was going to get everything. Corey had also been taking out life insurance policies on Eric without him knowing. Prosecutors alleged that she had secretly taken at least 4 separate life insurance policies on Eric between 2015 and 2017 without his knowledge, with a combined amount of nearly $2 million. In January of 2022, just weeks before Eric's passing, investigators say that she forged his signature to take out yet another $100,000 policy. It also came out, just when you think she can't get any worse, Corey was having an affair. In 2020, Corey began a romantic affair with a man named Robert Josh Grossman, who went by Josh. Josh was also involved in real estate, and he worked with Corey on different projects building houses. The two of them discussed dreams of a future together. There were text messages found in which Corey told Josh that she wanted to leave Eric and one day marry him. A text from Corey to Josh reads, quote, "If he could just go away and you could just be here, life would be so perfect," end quote. But the real nail in the coffin was when investigators found a secret phone that Corey had. On said phone was a contact named simply as CL Carmen Lauber, the woman who cleaned one of Corey's houses as she was flipping. At some point in early 2022, Corey approached Carmen looking for a certain substance she said that she needed as medication for an investor. Carmen connected her with a man by the name of Robert, and the two of them arranged transactions at a gas station in Draper, Utah. The first purchase happened February 11th, 2022, 3 days before Valentine's Day, but Corey came back after that. She wanted something stronger. She used a specific phrase. She asked for, quote, "the Michael Jackson stuff," end quote. The second transaction took place February 26, 2022, and a third and final transaction took place March 9th, 2022, just 6 days before Eric's body would be found. All of that is only part of what investigators discovered throughout their year-long investigation, but finally on May 8th of 2023, over a year after Eric's passing and just 5 weeks after Corey had appeared on that Good Things Utah to promote her grief book, she was arrested and charged with aggravated murder. A judge denied her bail, saying that she was a substantial danger to the community. Her trial began February 23rd of 2026, and it lasted 13 days. Prosecutors calling more than 40 witnesses, the defense calling none. Corey Richens declined to testify in her own defense, and on March 16th, so literally just last week, Corey Richens was found guilty on all counts. She's not yet been sentenced, but Yeah. Outside of the courthouse, Eric's sister Amy spoke saying, quote, honestly, I feel like we're all in shock. It's been a long time coming, so just very happy that we got justice for my brother. Our focus is now on honoring Eric's life and supporting his voice as we all continue to heal, end quote. And I know you guys are wondering, it sounds like the 3 sons have been taken by some of Eric's relatives, and I believe they have also filed for guardianship. Yeah. I mean, the guts that she has. And obviously every single case we cover on my page is horrible and terrible and so heartbreaking and sad. But there's just something that really breaks my heart when it's the spouse, because it's like at one point in your life, you married this person, you stood in front of one another, you said your vows to each other, and now this is how everything ends. It's just, it's beyond me. Anyway, that is all I have for today's video. Thank you for spending time with me today and for listening to Eric's story. Hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day and make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.